When did you realize, oh crap, I'm in a cult? When I was stationed on Okinawa, late 90s, I went to this church that seemed to be the pretty generic Christian church, but they met in a small room above a store. I didn't think too much about that until I got a new pastor. They owned a house in town and always invited everyone over for some cookouts and Bible study. The new pastor was actively encouraging the enlisted service members to move into the house and get the housing allowance to support the house. Then he wanted to see our LES, which are like our military pay stubs, to ensure you were supporting the church enough. I think the final straw was when they started taking attendance for their 7 days. And yeah, you were expected to attend some church things 7 days a week, with a level of shame for anyone who didn't make it to everything. I didn't tell them I wasn't going anymore, I just stopped showing up. They knew where my barracks room was and they sent soul savers to take me back to the church. The last time they talked to me, they again went with the shame route that no other church would get me into heaven, and I told them I think they proved I made the right decision. I googled my cult's name for the first time, which I thought was just the name of the church, and I saw many articles about how the leader was charged for a lot of cases of the unspeakable act. I showed my fellow cult members and they told me, the leader said that all those articles are lying and we shouldn't believe them. I reflected some more and realized that weekday services at 4 a.m. and Sunday services that last 7 hours were absolutely not the norm. I grew up in mine and I kind of always knew. There wasn't an oh crap moment, it was more like a I've had enough of this moment. For me, it was when one of my elders told me I should try and figure out why God was punishing me by giving me cancer. F you, Kevin. For your sake, let's hope we never cross paths again. When the leader wanted to split up all the marriages and take the wives for himself, and when he wanted to give the husbands of those wives different women to be with. Basically sharing the women, except nobody had a say in who they were to be with. Many were deeply unhappy and pained by this, but they had to submit to the Holy Spirit, as they'd say, and do what they were told. I was a teen at the time my family and I left this cult, so thankfully I wasn't pawned off on some random guy. When I told my parents that I wanted to cut my hair for the first time at 16 and they made me sign a contract claiming all responsibility for any disease or other misfortune that God would rain upon me for it. Well, there's going to be a lot more deeply disturbing and upsetting stuff in this group, so I wanted to focus on one of the funnier ones. So these people really took the Samsonian story to heart, huh? Can't cut your hair or your hale and hearty body will lose its strength. Wild. The CEDU boarding schools were founded by a high-ranking Synanon member named Mel Wasserman. If you guys don't know what Synanon is, it's a wild story of substance and alcohol treatment organizations that devolved into a criminal cult. There's about a dozen of these schools, and although CEDU or cedu has long since shut down, the schools are still open. They kept all of the teachings of Synanon but dumbed them down for kids. Every few months, we'd go through a workshop called Profeets, where they'd do weird frickin' things like make one person sit on a mattress in the middle of the room and have the rest of us pretend like it was a life raft, and you have to scream out all the reasons you have to live and beg for your life. Staff would walk around going, you live, you die, you live, pretty much all down to favoritism. If you get picked, you get on the life raft. If you don't, you drown. Which was a bit touchy for me because my older brother had just died from drowning less than 3 years earlier. But I had to act it out regardless, otherwise I'd fail the Profeet and be pushed back, and then I'd be there for another 3 months until the next one rolls around. Also, sleep deprivation was a key part. The last workshop was 7 days, and the whole time you were told you had to refer to yourself as me. I don't know how to explain this, but pretty much if you told a staff member that you didn't want to do something, they'd be like, that's right, I doesn't want to do this, but your me does. This was right before they dropped you off at a mall. Keep in mind we were all kids who lived in the middle of nowhere in Idaho, who may have been away from the world for almost 3 years, and then you had to 1. Buy someone food, 2. Get someone's address, and 3. Talk to someone of the opposite gender, and some other crap. But you couldn't tell other people why you were doing it. Think about that the next time you were in a mall, if anyone even goes to malls anymore. You'd have to approach random strangers and do that after being shut away for almost 3 years. When you graduate that Profeet at the summit, the whole school, about 60 kids at one time, gathered in the main room in the house. They play The Rose by Bette Midler of all fricking songs, and the kids walk one by one with a rose and walk through the crowd and touch their hands and cry and, Jesus Christ, what the frick? I just clicked on that song while I was writing this, and it made my heart start beating and really took me right back there. We had a thing called raps, where we'd sit in a circle for 3.5 hours, 4 times a week, and just share or get yelled at or have to rat other kids out. Disclosure circles were like raps on Smack, and they lasted up to 6 hours. That's where the staff would have to share stuff about themselves too. I learned that one of the staff committed the unspeakable act on an unconscious person who drank too much, so that was nice. None of the staff there had any kind of certification or degree or was qualified to teach therapy to kids. I don't even think you had to have a high school diploma, and this was North Idaho in the middle of the frickin' woods. At the end of the 5th profit, staff and your friends would hold you down as you struggled to get up, and it would give you this weightless feeling, and then they held you up to a light afterwards. That was your rebirth as you shed your shadow self away. You looked back at your shadow and told it goodbye, then it was someone else's turn. The shadow self is something that was connected to the first profit. You had to draw an ugly image of yourself and then face a wall and stare at it. Also, during that final profit, you had to put your head down between your legs and scream out confessions at the floor. If you couldn't think of anything, you just had to scream at the top of your lungs. There were only about 14 kids to a peer group, so imagine a room of 14 to 7-year-olds just screaming, crying, and yelling out the most horrible things that had happened to them while staff paced around them, making sure they did a good job. They were able to keep you there until you were 22, if you were enrolled when you were underage. One of my best friends there was there for 4 years. If only you could see just how utterly lost he is right now. I'm afraid to even reach out because he's so far gone. I can go on and on and on. I was there for 2 years, and this doesn't even really scratch the surface of all the weird stuff. When did I find out? Like 10 years later when I really started thinking about it. It all felt totally normal. And to all the cedu kids listening to this, I'm sorry, you were in a cult. Just really take the time to think about it. All the weird sayings, the agreements, the smoosh piles, the bands, the raps, the jumpsuits, the repetitive music, the scrolls, the workshops, the monitored phone calls and the mandatory positivity letters, the outlets, the peace talks, the inner circles, all of it. This was all synanon. That's not even including the profits, my guys. I still have my profit journal around here somewhere. When I showed up at my religious university as a freshman and went to my first computer science class, and the teacher made us read a section of scripture before the lesson and open with a prayer. I was also one of only 3 women in the class, and he'd constantly joke about how we all needed to get married so he wouldn't have to program anymore. This was at BYU, the religious college run by the Mormon church. And this moment stood out because I was on my first few days of college and I'd just moved from a liberal city to Utah. And all of a sudden I was hit with the fact that women weren't viewed as equals in this religion I'd grown up in. The professors would talk about how women were taking up seats that could go to men who needed to support their families, and how our educations would be a waste because we'd all drop out and have kids anyway. Joke's on them. I finished my degree at a different university, and I've been working as a software engineer at a Big 3 tech company for a few months now. When I was threatened with their version of excommunication, which also involved disowning by my family for the great sin of wanting to go to university. Yep. Can't have people going to get educated and developing mechanisms for thinking independently, can we? Better nip that right in the bud. Classic churchy cult. Don't remember thou shalt not attend higher education and attend keg parties being a thing in the Old Testament. I was born into Scientology. Even though I internally questioned a lot when I was younger, I'd learned very early on not to actually question anything. My aha moment was when I was ready to go on to the next step, and one of the other members, who not surprisingly is also an ex-member now, they asked me why I was planning on doing what I was doing, and my answer was, it's what's expected of me. I went home and really thought about what I wanted and realized I didn't actually agree with most things in Scientology. I started to process to leave shortly after. I had to leave the right way since my dad and sister are still very involved and I don't want to lose them from my life. Leaving the right way depends on where you are within Scientology. There is public, who go in, donate, take courses, go to events, but are under no contractual obligation. Class V org staff, the place most public go to get their services done, and those on staff work there. Work is in quotation marks. It's more like glorified volunteerism. You're typically under either a 2.5-year or a 5-year contract, and you're expected to work at least 40 hours a week. When I was a senior in high school and told them I couldn't work all those hours, it was insane the amount of pressure I had put on me to drop out of high school to go work for them full-time. And by full-time, I mean Monday to Friday 9 to 10, and Saturday, Sunday 9 through 6. And there would be events for the public on a lot of the Saturday nights that would go until past 11. I didn't drop out of school, but it was the point of contention the entire time I was there. The Sea Org was the highest level of commitment within Scientology, and within it there were even more levels. But I don't know about it since I was never actually in. I do know that you have to sign a billion-year contract, get housed and fed on their dime, but the rooms are essentially closets with a bed and dresser, no real personal space, and that they'd sometimes make about $50 a week for working 80 hours a week. You don't really get time off. If you were there, you were expected to be available for anything since you really had no other obligations. So, how I left? As stated above, I was on staff at Class V org, and when you do that, you don't pay for any services you get. So I'd finished one of my services, and was talking about what the next one I was going to do was, when one of the other staff members asked me why I was choosing the one that I did. And essentially, I'd already started down on one of the several different paths. So my answer was basically, it's what's expected of me, and when I said that, he told me to go home and think about what I'd said. I did think about it, and over the next few weeks, I started opening my eyes to things that were happening that I didn't agree with. I realized that I really wasn't happy and that wasn't what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So I decided I was done and I was going to break my staff contract. I don't remember who I told, but they started the ball rolling right away. You need to have a leaving staff security check, basically a super intense, very expensive exit interview that takes days or even weeks to complete, and once that's complete, you're supposed to essentially make amends with anyone you feel you've wronged by leaving. Then, to get back in good standing, you have to pay your freeloaded debt. So any of those services I told you were free while you were on staff, well, now you're off staff, you have to pay back the organization for them, and it could be thousands and thousands of dollars. My dad paid for my security check because I said I wasn't spending any money on them and he wanted me to be in good standing. I had some money saved up from when my mum passed away and I used that to pay off my freeloader debt. Trust me, I wish I hadn't done that. But then after that, I essentially made sure to not say anything bad about Scientology around members that I knew were active. As far as my dad's concerned, I still think highly of Scientology, but that it's just not for me. I think my sister knows better, but we just don't talk about that. I've been out for about 15 years at this point, and I still get mail. I still get phone calls. It's still awkward when I see Scientologists I used to be close with, but I am much happier now. I love my life that I've made for myself. Most of the stories you hear of people escaping and needing to hide are from the Sea Org. I really don't have experience with that to know how difficult it must have been for those people. I will say that I've watched most of the Leah Remini show, and most of the stories do not seem made up or exaggerated to me. I can see how a lot of them would have really happened, and it's extremely unfortunate that others don't see the blatantly bad stuff happening right under their nose. The Mormon cult. I realized Mormons treat people who live there like absolute crap, and families are torn apart because a family member stops believing. Mormon kids are pretty much forced to join the church at 8 and go on a mission at 18 if they're male. You also have to pay 10% of all income before taxes to the church in order to get into the temple. There's also the strict control of your children's bedroom lives, teaching false history, and any information that doesn't come directly from the church is labeled anti-Mormon. It was a hard journey getting out, but completely worth it. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. When I realized that only those who had significantly contributed financially were able to advance in my organization, I learned that my father had poured thousands into the system and each special course we'd attended as kids cost thousands each. Honestly, I don't know if this was a cult or not, but a friend of mine has been vague about her religion, Arissa, and the way her parents treat her, and the way she acts, it seems like she's in a cult. She's luckily come to the realization that her religion may be a bit troublesome, and the second she can move out, she will. According to her, Arissa is a rare religion, and even Googling it won't give you much. She's tried. It's also the name of a state in India. A lot of people here are thinking it might be the religion of Orisha. However, both her and her parents are Indian, and Orisha doesn't seem to originate in India. So I find it a bit unlikely that this is it, and I'll take it with a grain of salt, but I won't rule it out. Well, as a Mormon, we had many culty things, but probably the biggest red flag to me was the fact that I wasn't allowed to do any research on the religion unless it was from pre-approved sources. Oof, this is weird, because I've known Mormons from other countries that actually seemed like very fine people who weren't prone to such rigid oppression, and I have no idea whether that means the more culty aspects are absent outside the main US community, or whether they're just very good at hiding it. Let me know in the comments. The South Korean cult. I attended, but thankfully didn't join in the end. I'd just moved to Korea at 18 years old and didn't really know anyone. I was just starting to learn Korean, Conversational, but still low level, and I didn't really have a lot of friends yet. Someone invited me to go to church with them, and they were really nice, and I wanted to meet people. I had a lot of fun at that church. The people would take me out to eat, help me with Korean, and even help me with my homework and test prep. It was 100% the nicest church I've ever visited, and I felt like I had a place to fit in now. This is how they suck people in. Also, there was this female pastor who was super hot and would sometimes let people, always younger men, stay with her if they needed a place. I always wondered if this was an intentional tactic to try to lure more young men in, because this specific church, one location of many, seemed to only go after men. Eventually, they started pressuring me to make myself unhealthy, saying there was a balance between physical and spiritual strength. I love bodybuilding, so me being physically strong was an issue. They were pressuring me to lose muscle and try to make myself sick if possible, to make my body a bit weaker. They said if I didn't, my soul would grow restless and crawl out of my mouth while I was asleep. I repeatedly said I wasn't interested, but I wanted to continue attending the church. This was not acceptable at all. They strongly pressured me to start making myself ill. I stopped going to the church and they waited outside of my school for me and followed me around for what seemed like a couple of months. They knew my class schedule and were always outside trying to talk to me. Eventually, in the end, they backed off and I never heard from them again. Another guy from the church also got creeped out and left, and we're still good friends to this day. I always kind of knew, but it really clicked for me when I was 15. My friend, also 15, had recently gotten knocked up by someone else in our youth program and had gone to a clinic. Told no one. Within a week, she and her entire family were ousted from the church, and they railed on her and her sins for a month. I think that's the moment I knew I was done. My grandpa, who wasn't in the church, also used to tell me they were on an FBI watch list as a hate group. I don't know the validity of that, but I wouldn't say it was unwarranted. I think it took about 8 months after I was excommunicated for being a victim of the unspeakable act, and then not going through with the forced marriage to fix everything. I was born into it, so the controlling rules, the families being torn apart because someone left or wouldn't join, the discouragement of women doing anything but being housewives, church 20 hours a week, they were all just my life and seemed completely normal. They kicked me out for a year, and during that time I started to see things differently. I began to see the world in shades of grey instead of the usual black and white. With the help of therapy and some honest, supportive friends, non-members obviously, as I never saw my cult friends or family again, I realized, hey, that was actually really messed up. I think I was in a cult. Raised Jehovah's Witness. Realized the group had more in common with George Orwell's 1984 than the teachings and lifestyles of Jesus. There's a lot of truly good people caught up in the group, but utterly unaware of the hidden history of the organization, the messed up way they raise and deal with their kids, and the mind control techniques in use. I did the deed before I was married, and my parents turned me into the elders for discipline. I said I didn't think what I did was wrong, and they excommunicated me from the church, friends, and family. Parents didn't let me talk to my siblings while they grew up. I haven't spoken to 2 of my siblings in 12 years now, and I speak to my parents about once per year. It really effed me up and left me unable to form close relationships. This will be controversial, and I don't know if I'd describe it exactly as a cult, but at least within my specific upbringing, nobody thinks you can leave the faith. There are swaths of the world that believe leaving doesn't happen, or even should lead to physical punishment and persecution, like Scientology. You can even die. A lot of people believe you should die. I legitimately didn't know you could leave it. The media around you is highly controlled, it praises converts to it, especially white ones, and even people from outside the faith group put everyone in it on a podium, to the detriment of people who don't fit within its orthodoxies. Women have huge amounts of pressure on them to control their bodies, purity culture is rife, abstinence is taught at religious schools, and the craziest thing is, again, a lot of people who don't even belong to it protect and idolize it. A lot of its adherents, to be fair to them, just don't know what their religious figures even did or believed. So often the people leaving it know the darker side of the generally well-packaged exterior that's presented by preachers earning millions and targeting particularly vulnerable people. In short, I was raised Muslim, specifically Sunni, slightly more orthodox than the norm, but pretty normal in upbringing. Most people can never openly leave. My primary school. The principal ran the school like he was in charge of everything. He was, but I mean in a different manner. Anyway, so when I was in prep, they always said, line up in lines, only hold the boys' hands. Pretty standard if you didn't want to get lost, right? Well, if you tried to even hold a girl's hand if you were a girl, you'd get a punishment in the timeout corner. They also forced Christianity upon everyone, had the library teacher come down and only read Bible entries. You wouldn't learn anything but Jesus and God, along with English, mainly English. This was up until you hit grade 4. So yeah, when I left, I literally felt so refreshed. Australian Catholic schools are weird as all hell. They also made you attend liturgies that went through class time, even when it's the important part of the year where everyone's rushing to get work done. They also yell at you for not smiling. It wasn't so much a "this is a cult" moment, but more of a "this isn't right" moment. The place had been sued by a former member over something I can't remember. She'd won, completely. The wife of the leader spent an entire 2-hour meeting using scripture and whatnot to tell everyone that the loss was actually a win. After that, it was a number of things that built up before I left, a week after my parents had stopped going.
People who made an impulse decision when they found out Hawaii was going to be nuked. What did you do, and do you regret it? Apologies for the Hawaiian mispronunciation in advance. Currently in Kailua on the island of Oahu. When my wife and I got the message, we were in bed. She asked me to make scrambled eggs with sausage, toast, and avocado. So I went downstairs and made breakfast as fast and best I could. Gave my pup some too, because he's going to dine like a king if it's really his last meal. After the false alarm, we made an appointment at an ultrasound office to see our unborn daughter. Life is precious. I started off trying to wake up my roommates to no avail. Then, in extreme denial, I walked outside my home to see if everyone else was hysterically preparing for a disaster. There were crowds of people running to their cars from the beach, the freeway was completely blocked, and yet there were also elderly people who didn't get a notification just watering their lawn as if nothing was happening. After the 5 minutes outside, which felt like an hour, I walked back in to see my roommates awake, switching through channels and seeing a banner on every channel that warned us to seek shelter, stay to the floor, and stay away from windows. Then I received a frantic call from my mom, from California, in tears saying how much she loved me and then calling my dad and 2 sisters saying it could be the last time they might talk to me. My 12-year-old sister felt so rushed and says she loved me but didn't know what else to say. I could hear my other 6-year-old sister say, "How could Ryan be dying? There's no way." At this point, my biggest fear was no longer dying. It was the thought of my family I'm leaving behind. I told them how I live in an area with low population and away from military bases, and I should be fine with my water and food reserves. Mid-call, I receive an incoming call from my uncle who lives on the island. I figured he had important news that was relevant, so I told my family I had to hang up. He told me it was a false alarm, so I proceeded to tell everyone else. And that concluded my most stressful 30 minutes ever. My best friend is vacationing there. She crawled into bed with her 3- and 5-year-old daughters and held them while accepting that they were going to die. Her husband called from a fishing boat trip to say he loved them and wished he was with them. My grandma told us she bought MREs on Amazon when she got the alert. We had to actually explain to her how that wouldn't have helped. When I heard about it, my 12-year-old daughter called from a shelter at a basketball game she was cheering for. Neither my wife and I received any cell notification, so we looked at each other and decided that by this point, if something is coming, we don't have time to seek shelter, so just hope for the best and let the other kids sleep. I have a coworker that ran red lights, taking his family to a hospital basement for shelter where a woman was forced to give birth. 100% don't regret my approach to this. Personally, I slept through it. I woke up to the second, "lol, never mind," alert. Though my dad was down at the beach taking pictures, and he told me later that he fully intended to just stay there and hang out. My mom had thought her phone had a virus, so she didn't do anything.
807, ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii. Seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. 845, lol, never mind.
Hawaii resident here. While I did make the impulse decision, the people around me did. I was sleeping when the announcement came out, and the others in my house didn't decide to wake me up. They said, if I was gonna die, might as well let me die in my sleep. We all became tired of the news after 2 hours. It just became annoying. Cleared out the fridge and hid in it for 6 hours. Got the alert with 2% battery, so had no idea it was fake. Went to Honokohau to dive. Figured 100 feet underwater was as good a place as any. No boom. My dad lives in Molokai, population of 8,000 or so. I called him when I heard about it, asked him about it. He said, 1, he didn't think it was real anyway. 2, a nuke from North Korea would be small and aimed at one of the population centers, Oahu, Maui, Big Island, and would not kill him. And 3, if 1 and 2 were wrong, he couldn't do much to stop it. He just had breakfast on the lanai like usual. Side note, for mainlanders, a lanai is a deck and lanai is another island. I ate all the leftover lasagna in my fridge. I figured that if crap's about to hit the fan, I better carb the heck up. I texted my mother, "I need to tell you I love you. In case everything goes wrong, please tell everyone I love them and I've had a wonderful life. I'm very happy." She called me in a panic and I told her I loved her. She asked me if I was going to leave and I told her I was going to stay with my husband no matter what. I ended the call because I didn't want her to hear me die if it did happen. Then I kissed my husband and we held each other on the couch. It was a good day. My wife and I had just sat down to eat at Cafe 100 in Hilo on the Big Island when we all got the alert. I don't know if it's because we were both first responders or what, but we just continued eating while trying to check the internet to see if it was real. I know it said not a drill, but it was just so, surreal? The owner sent his employees home and sat with us. I remember thinking that this is an island, there's no place to go, and I already paid for this meal, dang it. I got on the emergency services scanner for the island and heard someone confirm it wasn't real, about 15 minutes before the actual alert went to everyone, so that was good. I'm just mad that the first place the government went to confirm it was false was freaking Twitter. We had next to no internet connection because everyone was jamming the signal, and Twitter is terrible anyway. Why not send an all clear on the phones ASAP? It was 8:07 a.m. and I was sitting in my hotel room in Waikiki browsing Reddit, saw the alert, and immediately turned on the news and started going to Twitter. I didn't hear any sirens. No news. It was eerie enough to question, so I went outside my door and saw people yelling and people calling loved ones. I was glad I stayed calm, but hotel staff was running out of the building and the lobby was a crap show for about 20 minutes. From my point of view, the locals seemed scared it was their home and livelihood. I was on an island 2,395 miles away from home, so if I was gonna die, at least there was nice weather. My friend who goes to college on the island said campus was an absolute crap show. All I regret is filling my emergency water containers right behind the car. So now I'm blocked in the garage by 150 gallons of water. I felt like this alert showed me that I can keep calm and that I'm a bit apathetic towards death, and I'm pretty proud of myself. I got drunk for the first time in 4 years of sobriety. Oops. I made an impulse decision to stay in bed with my wife. Nowhere to go for safety, no time to get there anyway. Might as well be comfortable in my bed with someone I love. My 70-year-old dad ate 2 loaves of bread while hiding in his closet. He said he only regrets it because he has to buy more bread now. This man was gonna die crammed full of bread. I can't stop laughing. Well, I don't live in Hawaii, but as someone who's planning for some of this stuff, I'd caution against just resigning yourself to die. Depending on a lot of different factors, you could easily survive. A woman survived Hiroshima 300 meters from the hypocenter of the blast because she was in a sturdy building. The man sitting on the steps outside became a shadow on the pavement. The typical yield you could expect to hit a counter-value target like a city is below 1 megaton, probably closer to the range of 150 to 300 kilotons. If you don't live downtown, the likely center of the target, and are at least 2 miles from the hypocenter, then you stand at least a 50% chance of surviving, which goes up exponentially if you take even basic steps to survive, like hiding in a windowless room. There are so many different factors to consider. Is the weapon set for ground detonation or airburst? If airburst, what altitude? What direction is the wind blowing? Fission versus fusion ratio, local geography and proximity, and so many others. Point is, don't give up. You can make it. I never would have expected motivational advice from someone who's a doomsday prepper. I regret not calling my parents. I was in total denial mode and only called my fiancé to ask if he got the alert too. He was working at Honolulu Airport, where the scene was more chaotic. He didn't think he'd ever see me again. I'm including details on how the airports were. All the flights were grounded. He was at H&L at the time, and passengers started walking off the aircraft. The captain eventually deplaned everyone. Security and TSA were as clueless as everyone, and couldn't direct anyone to shelter because there really isn't one. Some people ran out the terminal, presumably to get to their cars and drive home. I was at Hilo Airport at the time, but some tourists were huddled together, praying and/or crying. We managed to get our car before all the rental stands closed up. He also said at Kona, TSA allowed all passengers through to seek shelter inside. Not sure where though because it's open air. When the all clear came through, all passengers had to exit and be rescreened, causing massive flight delays. I was in the living room changing my 2-month-old son's diaper. My wife was in the bedroom sleeping in. I hear the alarm go off on my phone a couple feet away and just think, oh, it's just one of those Amber Alerts, and go back to changing his diaper. A second later, my wife comes up running out of the bedroom screaming that we were going to die. I kind of froze up. All I could think about was how helpless I felt and how I couldn't do anything to save my newborn son. My wife was running around the house grabbing diapers and formula for the baby, and I was just slowly finishing changing his diaper because I couldn't imagine that something like this could happen. After about 2 to 3 minutes, I sort of snapped back to reality and focused only on getting my son and wife to some sort of safety. I live in a relatively small beach house with very thin walls, so I knew it wouldn't do anything, but I told my wife we would be safest in the bathroom in the middle of our house. It really wasn't an impulse decision, but throughout the whole thing, I didn't even think to call or text any of my family on the mainland. If you had asked me what I would do if put in this situation, I would say I would call my parents and tell them I love them, but I didn't even think of that. I just thought about how much I love my wife and son, and how sad I was that I wouldn't be able to see who he would become when he grows up. This has really given me a completely different perspective on life, and makes me sad that I didn't even think to say goodbye to my family back home. TLDR, I didn't think to call anyone back home and could only think about my wife and newborn son. It's funny how he phrases this as if it's something he regrets, but honestly, he should be glad that his first instinct was being with the people he cared about the most who were with him. Reading this next one, I can only think of a movie like Shaun of the Dead. In the chaos of figuring out where to seek shelter, we ended up deciding to go to the hospital that my wife works at. She's a nurse. Figuring we could maybe help out with the flood of people that will be coming to the hospital with injuries. We have about 20 minutes from the time an alert is received until the missile hits. We were up against that limit when I pulled into a parking spot I found on the street. My wife grabbed my son and ran for the hospital. I grabbed some change and started paying the parking meter. My wife turned back and yelled, "What are you doing?" I yelled back, "We have to pay the meter. Even if the world is going to end, we're not savages." We didn't get a parking ticket, so no regrets. I was in a hostel, and I'm a male, and all of the other people in the hostel room I was in were women the same age as me. We all got the text at once and looked at each other. I knew what I had to do. Awkwardly comfort them with jokes while they cried. Not very romantic. Had an impulse panic attack. 195 out of 100 wouldn't recommend. Sorry, is 195 out of 100 your rating or your blood pressure? I was at a laundromat and my wife called me all panicked after receiving an alert on her iPhone. I told her that it was probably a mistake because I didn't receive it on my Samsung phone and that it must be a technical glitch or something. Also, it seemed like there should have been sirens, emergency news broadcasts, and a full-on national or military notice rather than just a notice to iOS users. In hindsight, I was right and seemed like Joe Cool, but I now feel like I should have reacted more and taken it seriously. I don't want the last moments of my life to be me saying, "It's probably nothing." I was a dismissive jerk to my wife who was genuinely freaking terrified, and I regret that. I was at work here on Maui. My wife was at home with the kids and I called them to calm them down. Once I realized they were all together, I went to the third floor of a building with some coworkers and waited for the big bang or whatever was to come. I told my big Samoan boss that we should just hug. This way they would find us frozen in time like the folks they found in Pompeii after Mount Vesuvius. Things were a little awkward the rest of the day. Rolled out of bed and told my boyfriend, well, how about I make us one last cup of coffee before we die? And proceeded to the kitchen to brew a small pot. All I wanted was one last time to do one of my favorite things. Sit and talk stories with him with coffee and cigarettes in the morning. Maybe it wasn't so impulsive, but there was something about it being the last time to ever do that. My uncle and his family live in Hawaii. He's been cheating on his wife for 2 years. We all found out about it in a mass text he sent 5 minutes after the emergency text went out. He wanted to clear the air before he died. I imagine that family reunion didn't go quite well. Late to respond here, but I'll throw mine in. I work at a huge tourist location on Oahu. Pretty quickly after the alert went out, we started herding all of our guests into large buses and moving them to a huge World War II bunker we have on property. In the middle of directing guests on where to go, I realized I hadn't clocked in yet and decided that if I was going to die in a thermonuclear detonation, I might as well be getting paid for it. I clocked in, then hopped a small bus with a few of my friends and workmates and headed toward the bunker. Once we got there, we decided that we really didn't want to die in a concrete cave surrounded by people we really didn't like. So we just kept driving to the other side of the property and hung out in the back of a big valley for a few hours. So I guess the impulsive thing I did was purposely avoid shelter and instead go somewhere beautiful? I told my girlfriend not to worry about it and go back to sleep. Her mom called her not even a minute later, crying, telling her to wake up and that she was rushing home now. She thought I wasn't scared, but if it were real, we wouldn't be able to do anything about it, so I just wanted her to be in my arms for our last moments. I live pretty close to a town center, so for me, I looked at my girlfriend and said, I love you and I hope it's fast. Sat in bed with her looking at pictures of our trip we took to Big Island and just was with her. The weirdest part is basically just living today. Yesterday, I fully accepted I was gonna die, so it's weird having to just live with the idea that I didn't. It's good, mate. You've seen the worst, and now you can take stock of what is really important and adjust your life accordingly. I have a favorite cup that I use all the time. One day, I will drop it and it will break. This is the inevitable end for a cup, but I will still be devastated that it broke. I will curse myself for not being more careful as I pick up the pieces. But if I accept now that the cup is already broken, then every moment with it is precious. This is some master Oogway levels of philosophy right here. I swallowed a bunch of popcorn seeds. I thought it'd be really funny if people found a bunch of popcorn around my burned body. I came out on social media. I don't completely regret it, but I definitely lost some friends, and a lot of my relationships with my friends have become really awkward. Hi everyone, I just want to say thank you to everyone for being so kind. I can't believe I got this many responses. I promise I'm doing fine. I have some really good friends who are helping me get through this. I had some idea of who were the friends that I'd thought I might lose before I came out, but even though I expected it, it still kind of hurt. Thanks everyone for the comfort and advice. Luckily, the only bomb that dropped that morning was in my bathroom, and it too took 40 minutes to clear. On a more serious note, I realized only last night that I kept my sanity intact due to dumb luck. For me, it was because I took the kids out late the night before, and we were all home all together. After digesting the stories of my friends and family, I realized that if my children had been at school or away with their mom, or if we had been driving in the middle of Maui somewhere, I'm pretty sure I would have absolutely lost it. I woke my 2 young girls and told them we were making a fort in my walk-in closet, the only room with no windows. From there, it was a surreal 10 minutes where I grabbed everything I could think of that would be helpful. Water, juice, granola bars, blankets, shoes, tablets for the kids. At one point, I mentally decided I needed to stop gathering items from rooms with glass windows and retreat into the closet. At that point, I just put on my game face with the girls and furiously tried to find out what I could with my phone. I exchanged a few texts with loved ones and took a call from my ex, making sure I had heard. I realized now that I was spared a lot of mental trauma because I had my family with me. I was doing the best I could for them, and basically, I didn't have to make a lot of hard decisions. I read a lot about the anguish of separated family, about those at soccer games, shopping at farmers markets, and those who had no idea what to do with those who they needed to protect, and those who they wanted to but couldn't contact. I'm glad my girls and I were spared the visuals of the panic. Later, I went to a sunset party which had a newfound vigor as friends embraced each other a bit harder and half-joked, "I'm glad you're alive." I was in my living room sitting next to my husband and sleeping 2-month-old. Saw the alert on my phone, we grabbed the baby and his pacifier and went and sat in the bathroom. I started calling people who work on base to see if they knew anything. My husband was checking Twitter, saw something about it being fake, went back out into the living room to check the local news. Saw the alert there, went back to the bathroom. The siren started going off, and I got there holding my 2-month-old baby, crying, thinking we were going to die, and I had no way to protect him. Got the false alarm message, and husband took the baby back out to the living room while I cried for a while longer in the bathroom. So, no major impulse decision, just a what the heck do I do, and cool, the best option I could think of in this moment is to sit in the freaking bathroom. I live near Pearl Harbor. I think the sirens I heard were coming from there. Either that or Hickam. My boss lives there and heard them too. I only heard them for about 5 seconds. Also, as for hiding in the bathroom, it is the only room in our house with no windows. Although pretty sure where I live it wouldn't have mattered. We would have been dead. Also, my husband and I grew up in the Midwest, so for tornadoes or severe thunderstorms, we would always either sit in the basement or bathroom. We don't have a basement here in Hawaii, so the bathroom it was. Also convenient for, the nervous craps and all. I woke up to people calling me about the alert, looked at my phone and read the message. I started searching the internet for answers, and there was zero coverage, which made me even more scared because I thought it was some kind of government conspiracy to not let the rest of the world know what was happening. I go to the Hawaii subreddit, and everyone is saying that they got the alert, but no info on whether the threat is real. Thinking about my life, I started to feel content with my inevitable death. Then I imagined my last moments slowly burning in intense pain, and that thought was followed by a minor anxiety attack and involuntary shaking for the next 30 minutes. I was hiding out at home with my best friend, decided to hold her hand and tell her I had feelings for her considering we were going to die and all. She didn't feel the same way. It's awkward now, and I'm worried for my friendship with her now. This didn't happen to me, but my friend, who is currently visiting his grandfather on the Big Island. He told me that right after he received the first alert to seek immediate shelter, he went down a couple homes to where the Clintons were staying to ask the Secret Service guys what was going on. Apparently, they were all in gas masks and ready to go. My friend, before receiving the false alarm alert, said he made a mimosa, said goodbye to his family, and planned to go sit on the beach to watch, as he described it, the fireworks. Wait, the Clintons? I regret telling our children what we thought was happening. My oldest child is 7. We explained it very simply with as little detail as we could, but geez. We told him a bomb was on the way from North Korea. We told him about the missile defense systems that all we could do was hope that they worked. We took away a lot of his innocence, and he's really shook up still. Afterwards, we told him about Mattis and how he's so smart and helps run the military to keep us safe. We couldn't think of anything comforting to say about the president, so my husband told him cool stories he's read about Mattis. My younger child is autistic and was just mad that the plans changed again. He was annoyed that the missile didn't come and didn't understand that the message was a mistake. He felt better when we went back to our original plan to hit the beach. I'm stationed on a nuclear sub in Pearl Harbor. I was on watch when it happened in the engine room. We had the whole duty chain of command in the reactor control room, and they told us they were going to evacuate all unnecessary personnel. We emergency closed the shielded volume of the reactor compartment so that we could get everyone off of the sub and into a floating support vessel docked near the ship. In hindsight, we should have just got all of the sailors into the reactor compartment and dogged the hatch. We'd have a pretty strong pressure barrier, and it has probably the best shield for a nuclear blast in the closest vicinity. It's sufficient to keep the crew from getting exposed to excessive amounts of radiation while the reactor is critical. Shields work both ways, so probably best to hug the shutdown reactor as opposed to getting vaporized topside. This will probably get buried, but I woke up at about 7:30 on Saturday morning to go check out some garage sales. I recently went through a tough breakup with my girlfriend of a year and a half, and I thought it'd be a nice way to stay busy and keep my mind off things. So I sat up in bed, took a huge rip off my dab pen, and hopped in the car to make my way down the mountain into town on the Big Island. About a mile down the road, my podcast stopped playing and my phone started blaring. I picked it up and read the message on the screen. Incoming missile. Take shelter immediately. This is not a drill. I rubbed my eyes and I couldn't believe the words that I was reading. I read them again and again before I pulled over, and as I was making a U-turn, I noticed everyone in their cars looking up from their phones with looks of horror on their faces. I'll probably never forget that. When I got in the door, I called my ex-girlfriend who was working at the Four Seasons, where she said people were losing their mind. I told her I loved her and how sorry I was for everything. She asked if her roommates could come to my house if they needed, and I said of course. Then she said she had to get back to work, and I begged her to leave if we got any more info. After we hung up, I went out to my back porch and looked to Oahu, and that's when I started hearing jet engine noise. It was getting louder, and I was running around to see if it was an airplane. Never did see a plane. I was terrified. No other way to put it. Last night we spent the night together for the first time in 10 days. She slept in my arms while I silently just laid there in the dark. Didn't sleep all night long because I missed that feeling so much. I didn't want to waste it by closing my eyes and passing out. I know we aren't going to get back together. It was a messed up day. This mistake shouldn't be swept under the rug. I feel like it was a very personal violation of public trust and people need to be fired at the very least. I hope no one ever has to go through that kind of fear and uncertainty ever again. I've heard stories of people I know who were sitting in bathtubs with their kids hysterically crying, people abandoning their cars and running on foot with their families. I want whoever is in charge of civil defense and the person who hit that button to be fired on the spot. Forget them. It's unacceptable. Doctors of Reddit. What is the most stupid thing a patient has said trying to correct you? I asked a patient complaining of dizziness if she had ever been diagnosed with vertigo. The doctor chimed in and said, No, she's a Libra. I then laughed hysterically at her awesome joke. She was dead serious. Patient comes in with abdominal pain. I think it's my gallbladder, they say. Looking over their chart, I see their gallbladder was removed 20 years ago, so that is impossible. I mention this, to which they reply, yeah, but it grew back. Yes, I know there are a number of other things it could have been. A retained stone crossed my mind, but after 20 years, I found this unlikely. She also had this scar to vouch for the surgery. There was definitely a psychosocial element to the case. I took care of a child that got chickenpox. The mother was strongly anti-vax, but was yelling at me, how can modern medicine not have a treatment for chickenpox? She couldn't grasp the concept that we do, she just refused it for her child. Sir, I need to know why you stopped taking your antiretrovirals for your HIV. Well, I met this witch online that... Wait, did you say witch? Yeah, she sent me a bunch of herbs every month to cure my HIV, and they worked. Last time I checked, I was cured. Where and what test did you do to know you were cured? I made an online test that the witch told me to. There were a lot of random questions, but in the end, it said that I was free of HIV. Okay, we will need to do a blood test to confirm that. Now, can you tell me which herbs you were consuming? I don't know the name, but I have them right here. He points at his backpack. May I take a look? Sure. I opened the bag and what I saw was nothing but grinded oregano with something that smelled like chlorine. The patient sadly died from a severe sepsis a month later with a highly resistant microorganism, just because a witch in a website told him to stop taking his meds. A mother brought her 14-year-old daughter to the ER due to hypogastric pain and spotting. We asked the daughter when was her last period. She said 2 months ago. We asked her for her sexual history, thinking this might be an ectopic pregnancy. The mother kept butting in, saying that she is still a virgin and she has no boyfriend. We left it at that until her mother went out to go to the bathroom. The patient admitted that she had sexual intercourse with a classmate of hers. We requested for pregnancy test and HCG titers. It really looks like ectopic pregnancy. We advised the mother that her daughter needs immediate surgical intervention. She refused to believe us, saying that the lab results are unreliable and untrue. She keeps on saying that her daughter is a virgin. She stormed out of the ER with her daughter that looks really in pain. I had a patient once with family members who were some of the most frustrating people I've ever dealt with. The patient was morbidly obese and had open sores and wounds in all her skin folds. Cleaning her when she was first admitted was like some sort of disgusting clown car. We found a floral pillowcase shoved under one fold, and what we think was a smashed bread crust in a fold near her groin. Anyway, because of her weight, she wasn't a candidate for surgery, and therefore there was nothing our team could do for her. I think about 5 or 6 different meetings were held with her family to discuss her prognosis. Her daughter told the attending physician he didn't know what he was talking about, and that she had been this sick before and pulled through. Her pH was so low, it just read as below 6.8, and her blood pressure was a solid 60/25, despite every vasopressor under the sun running at 3 times the max doses. When the charge nurse pointed out her blood pressure on the monitor, the daughter said, "Psh, I've seen lower." When she finally died, her family was livid that we didn't save her. We coded her for 20 minutes, and they told us we should have continued for at least an hour. I felt terrible that our last days were spent in such torture, all because her family was in such denial about her condition. Had a patient with atrial fibrillation that needed to be on anticoagulation. I chose Pradaxa, and the patient said, no, that one doesn't have any antidote. In fact, it's the only new oral anticoagulant that has an approved reversal agent. Patient refused to believe me, like I got some bonus for killing her or something. 1-year-old hospitalized with ingestion of unknown drug. No immediate signs or symptoms. Mother says it's heroin from her brother's stash. Urine comes back positive for meth. Mom gets very angry and defensive and tells us it's just heroin and we should stop accusing her of having meth. Like, lady, why do you think letting your toddler try heroin is so much nobler? Another one I remembered back from my GP days out in the middle of nowhere. Lady comes in with itching of the scalp. I look at her head and she has matted, greasy, extremely dirty hair that actually smelled. I've seen a lot of dirty people, but it was really something else. She wanted medication. I suggested she wash and comb her hair regularly for a few days and see if it would get better. She said, and what if I wash my hair and it doesn't get better? Well, I'm sure you can accumulate the filth again in 10 years or something, so it's not a permanent loss. Lady comes in with shortness of breath. We check her troponin levels. They're elevated. Ma'am, you're having a heart attack. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. Her PCP came into the ER and fired her as his patient. She signed in against medical advice and left. She died the next day of a freaking heart attack. Yeah. I introduced myself to a patient as doctor, your anesthetist. Patient said that I could not be a doctor as anesthetists aren't doctors. Not long after, another patient asked me if I had to go to uni to be an anesthetist, and still another asked me if I had to know as much as a pharmacist. The number of patients I have seen who are acutely unwell because they stopped their medication does my head in. Almost always, the reason they stopped the medication is because the condition they were taking it for went away, as a result of the medication. Shaking my head. Totally irrelevant, but I kind of think anesthetists are rad. The only time anyone has been able to hit one of my veins first time with no waggling around in my arm was when I had to be knocked out. Everyone else struggles to get my veins, even when I'm hydrated. Fasting for surgery and no liquids, still got it first shot. I was impressed. Also, I have pet rats, and anesthesia is risky AF for them. And not only is my rat vet's head nurse small animal anesthetist rad as heck, but every time my rats have had surgery, they've gone well and recovered from the anesthesia well. And I guess I just appreciate that no anesthetists have done me any wrong. Oh my gosh. Y'all don't get enough credit. Ophthalmologist here. Told patient he needed reading glasses, which he didn't believe. I explained that everyone develops presbyopia eventually. Come on, George Clooney doesn't wear reading glasses. A, yes he does, and B, not sure why you're comparing yourself with him. This one's so petty but kind of funny. Had a female patient. Her mom asked me to adjust her scrotum. Trying not to burst out laughing, I said, "Your daughter's scrotum?" She acted like I was stupid and pointed to the back of her neck. I knew she wouldn't listen, as she was so convinced till I stopped arguing with her. And I also wanted her to go around saying it to other people. Med student, but a patient was telling me about how a doctor suggested she may have shingles of the eye, trying to get me to laugh at the other doctor because apparently shingles of the eye is a ridiculous concept. You can totally get shingles in your eye though. The time I was telling the family that the patient is going to die and her lab results, pH 6.6, lactic acid 25, are not compatible with life, and they said that they were pretty sure she would wake up if I put ice in her underpants. Well, yeah, we are not going to do that. She died and they still didn't believe me she was dead. They kept trying to wake her up. I didn't have a heart attack. I had a myocardial infarction. That's what a heart attack is, Chief. 20-year-old girl and her fiancé find out that she's pregnant. Me, partway through taking her history. Do you smoke cigarettes? Yeah, about a pack a day. You should definitely stop that. Well, my sister told me that if I stopped smoking, the baby would go into withdrawal and die. What? PSA, don't smoke if you're pregnant or planning on becoming pregnant. It's never too late to quit. Had a patient come into the ED for what was essentially a cold. Kept requesting antibiotics. Kept explaining that they wouldn't help her viral symptoms. But I did then sit down and give her a basic tutorial on the differences between bacteria and viruses and antibiotics and antivirals. Hopefully it was enough to help her in medical school finals the next week. The worst part is, I can't tell if this post is joking or not. I'm a doctor, but this was my nana, not a patient. She was drinking 11 cups of coffee a day, which is too much. We held an intervention while visiting for dinner, and when we told her she was addicted, she responded, No, the coffee is good for me. It helps me with my shaking. She cut down once we explained to her what drug withdrawal was. I work in a burn ICU, which is a weird little specialty, but the number of patients and visitors that come in knowing absolutely everything is annoying as heck. Mayonnaise, mustard, and butter are not acceptable burn treatments. Leave the condiments in the fridge. I do not appreciate having to scrub 3 jars of mayo off grandma. I had an incredibly sick patient with large burns and ARDS, a serious respiratory complication that makes it very difficult to oxygenate someone, even with maximum settings on the ventilator and continuous medication to open up the lungs. He was then put in a rotating bed that we bolt patients into and rotate them face down. He was also on continuous dialysis from sudden kidney failure. Anyway, so patient, incredibly sick, had 10 to 12 IV bags going at once. Just a general mess of a person. Here comes the family member with medical experience. These are the worst. They always end up being a transcriptionist or a nursing assistant at a nursing home or something, but they enjoy coming in and trying to run the show. Some highlights from said medical expert before I kicked her out of the unit. "Why aren't you paying attention to his brain waves?" Yes, she yelled everything. She was pointing to the display on the ventilator, which has everything to do with breathing and nothing to do with the brain. "Why isn't he on propropanol? It's negligent to not have him on propropanol." She meant propofol. Think Michael Jackson. But he was on ketamine and Versed because those worked like a charm for him, and propofol was having some unwarranted effects on him earlier. "The dressings are dirty. You need to change them immediately." Okay, go away right now. 1, it takes at least an hour or so to change a full body dressing while they're on the rotating bed, and the patient was so sick that if we rotated him face down to face up to get the dressings on his front, the fluid shifting in his lungs would have likely killed him. Also, burn dressings get gross quickly. I was super irritated by the time I kicked her out. Never kicked anyone else out since, but geez, she was annoying. When I was a medical student, this middle-aged male patient from a rural area got it in his head that I knew absolutely nothing, and he was doing me a service teaching and talking to me. He was in colorectal clinic for something unrelated and started telling me about the gland on the back of his neck that would drain every so often. When he saw that I was unfamiliar with this particular gland, he gave me this knowing look, laughed, and started instructing me, the dumb little medical student, about this gland. Apparently everybody has this gland for the immune system, but that his would drain when he was stressed. "No, sir, I was being polite, but you have a nasty abscess on the back of your neck." I was hoping that the patient would try to explain this medical wonder to my attending when he came in, but alas, he didn't. Med student here, but I have had 2 winners. When discussing a precancerous skin lesion on a patient, they opted to use their laser ray instead of classic treatment. It was a cancer laser ray that was bought online. It also apparently had frequencies for arthritis. They insisted that the vibratory frequency can be tuned to destroy cancer cells, just like a trained singer may be able to use her voice to break a crystal glass. The patient did not believe that cancer cells and regular cells would have the same frequency. Another patient insisted that his cancer had been properly treated at home with baking soda. He gave me a website like pH Kills Cancer or something. The patient also had with them a surgery report in which it appears their baking soda consumption resulted in buildup of abnormal calcium in the wall of the stomach, which had to be removed. Veterinarian here. The anti-vax movement has been slowly seeping into my profession for years, but in my area it's gotten much worse recently. Almost every day now I have a client inform me on how toxic vaccines are and that I should talk to their dog's breeder because he or she is very informed. Most of the time I'm able to convince them that this is incorrect. However, some are still quite resistant. Vaccinating for rabies is not just a suggestion, it is the law, and my clinic has a policy that we don't let any of our healthy animals be vaccine-free. I've had a few clients walk out over this policy. I feel bad for their animals. These are the same kinds of clients that won't use flea and tick prevention on their obviously flea-infested dog, but will use lemongrass and peppermint instead. Spoiler, it doesn't work. Mom of baby. I don't vaccinate, it's against my religion. Oh really? Just out of curiosity, what religion is that? I'm Catholic. Not really a correction per se, but it made me laugh a lot. I've had a few patients express dissatisfaction that their Botox only lasted 3 months, and they suspected that I was diluting the Botox. Both statements are absolutely true and consistent. Why are you looking at my hip? I said the pain was in my knee. The hip bone's connected to the leg bone's connected to the foot bone. Woman with this weird abdominal cramping, twitching presentation. I won't say stupid because she probably had some kind of undiagnosed dementia, but definitely the most bizarre. Ask her what she's feeling, why she's twitching her abdomen. It's like it's trying to get out. Like what's trying to get out, ma'am? My sperm. Ma'am, you don't have sperm. Oh. For those of you curious, by the time I saw her, last official diagnosis was pseudo-seizures. She had a tendency to start twitching parts of her body whenever we would start asking whether she had twitching in those areas. Ma'am, have you had any twitching in your legs? She looks at leg. Leg starts twitching. Yeah, I have. Woman with breast cancer. She was in the medical field too, so I'm unsure why she said the things she did. Perhaps she was still in denial? I don't know. Anyhow, so I was the intern when she came in for a chest tube insertion to drain her pleural effusion. It was obviously suspected to be malignant. After the procedure, I went home and the resident on call had to deal with multiple calls from the distraught staff in her ward, for reasons I shall explain below. The next morning, I was told by said resident, sporting a haggard appearance and bloodshot eyes from a busy shift, that she was my problem now. With that, the poor man left for home. I go in to see her and first get accosted by ward staff, who tell me she legit refused all pain meds right after procedure, which entailed a tube scratching against her parietal pleura. Ow. So I go in and am told by this woman who, let me remind you, was employed in the healthcare sector, that the tube had been pushed in far too much and is stabbing her, and that I need to undo the stitch and pull it out a few centimeters. No lady, I'm not authorized to do that. The x-ray was fine, no intervention was necessary. I tell her she needs to take her meds if she wants the pain to get better, and she says, no joke, that pain meds will further spread the cancer and that I should know that being a student of medicine. And she further said, look, no need to tell anybody, you're a doctor. Use your own judgment and pull the tube out. She was adamant. My professor was going to be late that day, and I obviously wasn't going to do anything without his permission. I documented her refusal and went on my way. She left by the afternoon against medical advice. I feel bad for her, but she wasn't letting me help, so yeah. Doctor here. One we commonly get is, I know my body. Scoped a guy with knee pain. The joint looked perfect. Told him after the surgery, and he told us, no, my tendons are all torn. I know my body. Told a lady she was pregnant. No, I'm not. I just had a big lunch. I know my body. Absolutely, when something doesn't feel right and your doctor doesn't want to listen, seek a second opinion. You know how your body normally feels. But if someone has performed an invasive surgery to look at your joint or has seen a fetus on ultrasound, they probably know what they're talking about. Probably the legions of women that seemingly don't know how long it can take for an IUD to work and want it taken out because it didn't instantly stop their periods within a month. Also the women that came in with chlamydia but deny having had intimacy. Like, come on, I'm not your boyfriend. You don't need to lie to me. Implying that she would if you were her boyfriend? I feel like that's something that would need to be talked about. Woman had a bad yeast infection. Besides that smell, I also smelled feces. I asked if she wiped back to front. She said, yeah, but that's not why I have this. It's from drinking pop. Despite my assurances that it was not from drinking pop, she wouldn't believe me. I said, okay, you must be right. I'm just a doctor, and prescribed her the same thing I would have if she was an intelligent person. Gynecologist here. Imagine a revved up version of that dreadlocked beanie-wearing woman meme. It's not vagina anymore. It's pronounced vagina now.
Oh, yes, your vagina is looking very lovely today.
Your blood pressure is very, very high. You need to take the blood pressure medications I prescribed you. I don't need no pills, doc. All I need is Jesus. Well, you're about to be seeing Jesus very soon if you don't take your medication. Radiographer here, and the ED doctor gave me a request for soft tissue neck x-rays, and the doctor was pretty much like, don't question it, just do it. Anyway, after that patient had left the ED, doctor came in and told me that the gentleman presented to ED at 3 a.m. because he had hot milk 3 days ago and his tongue has been hurting ever since. The patient basically burnt his tongue, but was insisting on an x-ray to ensure nothing is wrong. Paramedic student here. Not the most stupid thing I've encountered, but the most common stupid thing. Do you have any pain anywhere else? Nah, all good. Then what do you take this specific medication for? Oh, that's for my back pain. Or, any past medical history? Nah. Ever been to hospital? Nah. Have you had a heart attack before? Yeah, how do you know? Has a massive personal medication bag with cardiac meds. While I am a doctor, this happened to my wife, also a doctor. Female patient came in complaining of infertility, said she and her partner had been trying to conceive for like 5 years and had tried everything. At one point she let the pronoun slip, she and I, and my wife said, wait, let's back up a minute. Turns out the woman had been in a hetero relationship for a few years and never got pregnant despite using no protection. She then entered a same-sex relationship and again never got pregnant even though she really wanted to, leading her to believe she was infertile. When my wife tried to explain that conception requires sperm, sourced from a male, as well as an egg, the patient was incredulous and exclaimed that she didn't need a man in my life and she didn't feel like being judged. Perhaps needless to say, the patient was lost to follow-up. When I was about 16, I went to the hospital with sharp pain in the lower right-hand side of my abdomen. It seemed pretty serious, so both my parents were with me, which was unusual because they're divorced. A doctor looked at my symptoms and said it looked like appendicitis. I groaned. I don't have an appendix, it was taken out. My parents said, yes you do. When I was 6, I had surgery to correct testicular torsion. I kept both my testicles. My parents politely told people I had my appendix taken out to explain why I was in the hospital. I accepted this as the actual reason for my surgery, so years later when I learned the location of the appendix, I assumed they did some kind of laparoscopic surgery through my scrotum to explain the scar there. I was very surprised to learn I do, in fact, have an appendix. The pain turned out to be from a sharp piece of chicken bone. All the ones I can remember followed the same theme. Patient misunderstands the difference between correlation and causality. The most striking example was a young man who was dying of AIDS. Doc, I was never sick a day in my life until y'all started giving me all these meds. Well, sir, while you still had a functional immune system, you didn't need these meds. HIV is a treatable illness these days if you actually take the drugs. If you believe the drugs are the problem and not the virus, well, you can still die from it very quickly. Variations on that theme are very common, unfortunately. I'm a family practitioner, and I had a family not want to vaccinate their newborn because they heard that vaccines were derived from monkeys' brains, and they didn't want their child to develop monkey-like characteristics. All I can think about is what kind of TV show would George in the Jungle be like if that were the plot. I'm a registered dietitian/nutritionist. I was counseling a patient who was morbidly obese, diabetic, and had severe peripheral neuropathy. He was also a chiropractor who had a hard-on for homeopathic remedies. I couldn't get out a full sentence without this guy trying to tell me that a dilution of whatever the heck would do the exact same thing. Finally, I just said, "Look, doctor, you need to cut the sugar and eat something in the vegetable family with every meal. You can drink whatever potions you want on top of that, but 30 years of drinking your distilled water has landed you here, in my office, with a broken pancreas and no feeling in your feet. So let's give this a serious try unless you want to take a chance with your flower remedies when the heart attack or stroke hits." Since a few people have asked, he got highly offended and filed a complaint with our VP of Patient Relations. I was ordered to do some bullcrap sensitivity training where I was told that I should have listened to his opinion on care and validated him as being heard. I was also told, by at least 3 non-clinicians, that since he was a chiropractor, I should have given more weight to his opinion since he was a licensed healthcare provider. I finished the training and promptly began looking for a new job. I can think of 2 cases. One involves family members instead of the patient. I had a patient who had a simple L4-S1 fusion. Did great postoperatively. Went home and hippie daughter introduced some allegedly probiotic therapy to speed healing, which actually introduced bacteria into the surgical site. 3 weeks later, we took him to the OR emergently to remove the hardware, and he spent 6 weeks in the hospital thanks to the massive staph infection introduced by a hippie. The other was a naturopath/witch doctor brought into our ED, initially unresponsive but regained consciousness. He had a ruptured MCA aneurysm. He insisted we try some alternative bullcrap to shrink the size of the bleed and heal it naturally before we would try the OR. His naturopath friend came in to do something while we took another patient to the OR. Went to convey the seriousness of the situation and he went unresponsive again, about 2 minutes after I left his ED room, to which we invoked an EM caveat and took him to the OR for definitive repair and clipping. He's now the naturopath who saved 5 lives thanks to organ donation. Were you ever that 1 in a million? If so, what's your story? I am a 19-year-old male. In August of last year, I was driving with my sister when suddenly her face turned cold. "Gavin, your eyes are yellow," I remember her saying. I quickly pulled down the passenger's mirror, and to my horror, 2 yellow eyes radiated back at me. Fast forward, I spent a month being sick. The initial diagnosis was hepatitis A. Went back to the doctor, nothing was better. Things were worse, in fact. Was sent to the ER, then to the liver transplant unit at UCSF. By this point, my eyes had turned muddy orange, and my pee was the color of a mahogany tree. Anyways, the team of liver doctors at UCSF managed to save my liver. I was diagnosed with autoimmune hepatitis. Oh, and my eyes were wide again. Not me, my wife. We lived in Jacksonville, Florida. She rarely gets sick, but has mild insomnia. Around Wednesday, she had a low fever and complained of aches and sweats at night and trouble sleeping. That weekend, she wanted to see the doctor. I told her she probably had the flu, just wasn't used to the aches, and she always has trouble sleeping. But if she was still feeling bad Sunday, we'd go to a clinic. Saturday night, she couldn't sleep, so we made an appointment for Sunday afternoon. But on our way there, sure enough, she's feeling better. Doctor checks her out. She's feeling fine now, no fever. He says she probably had meningitis but is recovering. I'm due to go on a business trip to California the next day, Monday, and ask him if he thinks it's fine to go. He says, yeah, no problem. That evening, wife is eating and laughing and all is good. Monday morning, I leave early. That afternoon, my neighbor calls and lets me know my wife was wandering in the street in a delirium. My wife didn't know where she was, so the neighbor drove her to the ER. I book a flight home that night. The hospital checks her out. She has a fever, her blood cell count is in the basement, and she is completely out of it mentally. They're not sure what's wrong, and a bunch of specialists start descending on her. I have to fill out a bunch of paperwork on her medical history, where we've been, etc. They think maybe it's some weird autoimmune disorder. Not good. She gets a bunch of transfusions and put on a cocktail of meds while they figure it out. 3rd day in the hospital, the infectious disease guy comes in. Blood parasite. Maybe tick-borne. She'd been to the Midwest recently. Could have caught it if she went walking in the woods or a park. Next day he comes in, figured out the parasite. Why didn't you tell me she left the country? Huh? She hasn't. Well, she has malaria. Malaria? I thought you couldn't get that in the US. You can't. You need to go home and bring me her passport. What the heck? I retrieve her passport. CDC comes, does a whole case study on her, which they wouldn't release to us. Mosquito traps set up around the neighborhood. Mysterious vans start driving by spewing clouds of stuff. My wife stays in the ICU for a week, but recovers just fine. If you look at the 2010 CDC infectious disease report, you'll see a discussion of malaria and how the XX number of cases all are related to people recently returned from endemic areas, except for one woman in Duval County, Florida, who received it from a cryptic vector. When I was 14 years old, I woke up one day with heavy stomach cramps. We called the hospital and they told us that I probably have a stomach flu and should go to the doctor next morning. After one of the worst nights ever, vomiting and sleeping next to the toilet, we went to the doctor. I had a fever of 40 degrees Celsius and was aching a lot. The doctor told me I had to go to the ER and have it checked out because she thought my appendix was inflamed and causing the pain. We went to the ER and I stayed in the hospital for about 2 weeks, but they couldn't find anything. They treated me with broad-range antibiotics, and after 2 weeks I was feeling a bit better and they told me to go home and recover. The night I got back from the hospital, I went to bed and started hallucinating that I lived in a retirement home and that pirates were coming to steal our food. So I was flailing around trying to fend off pirates when my mother came in and asked what all the fuss was about. I told her what was going on and she looked at me like I had summoned a devil. She took my temperature and she instantly took me to the ER again. I had a 41 degrees Celsius fever. When we went back to the hospital, I got immediately treated for inflammation and they did a wide range of tests again. They saw that something in my body was inflamed, but they couldn't find it. I stayed in the hospital for about 2 more weeks when they finally found what was going on. My appendix was inflamed and burst the night I was having the hallucinations, but on all the scans they couldn't see my appendix. The doctor told me that if I came in 2 days later, I would have died because of the pus flowing in my body. Apparently, there is a 1% chance of all the appendix cases that the appendix is so stretched out that they couldn't see it on the scans or that the area was so inflamed they didn't see it. So after staying on antibiotics for about 2 more weeks, they finally removed my appendix and all the pain was gone. I stayed in the hospital for over 4 weeks just because of my appendix and my bad luck on being that 1%. For my 7th birthday, we went to Disneyland. They just happened to be having a car a day giveaway when we were there. For my 7th birthday, Mickey Mouse gave me a Pontiac Firebird. I'm allergic to potatoes. Never met someone else who is, so I guess it's 1 in a million. Never eaten chips or fries. How I met my wife. I'm from the Netherlands, she's from the US. We met in Israel. It was my first weekend in Israel. Decided to go on a pub crawl to meet some people and have fun. As I'm buying the ticket, my now wife walks up to the counter to also buy a ticket. The girl working there introduces us. We hit it off the first night, but I'm leaving in 2 days to stay with friends of friends in the middle of the desert for 3 months. 2 days after I leave, I lose my phone, don't have any way to get back in touch with her. I had little money and could stay work with the people in the desert. But I kept thinking about her, so after a week, I say I'm leaving. Take the next bus, goes 3 times a week at 5 a.m., and then a train to Tel Aviv. I had no idea how to find her, where to stay, and very little money. I email a couple hostels to find a work-stay agreement. Those jobs are very popular and usually planned months in advance. I get an email back when I arrive in Tel Aviv. I can come in for an interview because they have a spot. This is already ridiculously lucky. Right after the interview and dropping off my belongings, I went back to the first hostel to see if they would give me information. They wouldn't give me anything. Now I'm at a loss. Tel Aviv is a city of more than 500,000 people. I don't know anyone and have little more than the clothes on my back. Kind of defeated, I start wandering around and exploring the city. After a couple hours, I get hungry and decide to treat myself to a restaurant. I'm well out of the tourist area and find a place that's almost empty and rather cheap. I sit down, order a drink and something to eat. As I get my food, I see my now wife walking past the restaurant. She sees me, I see her. I'm literally dumbstruck and just kind of grin and wave. Remember how I lost my phone? She didn't know that and just thought I ignored her. She waves and keeps walking. I throw like 200 shekels, way too much, on the table and sprint after her, explained, and the rest is history. When I was a kid, I was chilling in the water of the Mediterranean Sea in Turkey. Suddenly, I felt an awful burning sensation on my stomach and my legs. I looked like I had been brutally sandpapered and I got a 40 degrees Celsius fever. Turns out I made contact with the jellyfish and later found out that it hadn't happened on that beach for 10 years or so. I was just extremely unlucky. Not sure about the odds on this one, but I survived a non-survivable plane crash. I was on an old PO2, famous for being very safe and uncrashable, on a tour of the desert in western China when I was like 7. My father's friend who hosted me and piloted the plane didn't survive, but somehow I got out with a concussion and apparently passed out for almost a day in the middle of the desert, in the wreckage of the crash, 50 kilometers from the town airport on the edge of the desert. The people who found me were some tree planters. A lot of people who live in these desert towns in China do this. Found me on their way, picking up a shipment, and the only reason they looked was because they were making a bet on how fast the egg would cook in the sand and went off to the road to test. First things first, according to legends, 15 minutes. I never tasted it though. So according to my dad, the theory that I might have lived was because the plane was mostly made out of fabrics and wood. So when the plane crashed, the front half collapsed and took the majority of the impact. Though I got knocked out, I was probably covered under the wreckage and in the shades. It cooled me off enough to survive for a day or so. I was in 2 separate car crashes in 2 separate cars in less than 45 minutes apart. I wasn't the driver for either crash. First car was hit from the side, friend came and picked us up, car lost traction, and we slid off the road and hit a pole. Neither was that bad, just poor timing. I slept wrong one night and pinched a nerve in my neck so severely I lost the right side of my body. It just went silent like it wasn't there for months. I woke up in the worst pain I've ever experienced and couldn't talk, move, or do anything. The ER doctor thought I was having a stroke. My doctor had never seen a case as severe as mine, and it was purely a freak accident. Recovery took months, but I have use of my leg and hand again, with some numbness. Other than pain and spasms, I'm mostly back to normal. A bird got into my room through a tiny hole in the ceiling and took a dump on me. Had 2 11-centimeter benign tumors growing in my spine, resulting in gradual paralysis from my chest down. They had no idea how the tumors formed. Surgery took 11 hours when they thought it would take 4 because the tumors were so complexly woven throughout my spine. I now have pretty much half a spine and chronic pain, but I'd take that over losing my life from paralysis and being unable to breathe. The first one, I don't know about the exact odds, but I was born on 7/7/77 and weighed 7 pounds and 7 ounces. Sadly though, I clocked in at 6:50 a.m. The other is that around the age of 14, I started to notice the outsides of both of my feet starting to get much wider. After a couple years of buying expensive custom-made shoes, they decided to perform surgery on my feet. Turned out I had extra muscle growth along with something else I don't recall at the moment. My podiatrist told me he submitted a scholarly article on it. May also have been genetic, as when my dad was 3, he developed an extra toe growing out of each one of his big toes. I actually know the name for this offhand, and it's called polydactyly. I've got the middle toes on both feet webbed. So did Stalin. Quack. When I was a teenager, I had just started working at the local Sears Auto Center Express lube shop, and on day 1 did a quick orientation and my first oil change. The manager walked away when he felt I was good to go, and the oil change went well. Fast forward a few days later, my manager had asked me to come into his office, and he explained that the oil filter I had used had one huge flaw. I didn't know what that was, and it turned out the filter was pressed on backwards into the filter can and it wouldn't allow oil to flow in, and it damaged the motor. They had to purchase a new motor for the person, and I still kept my job. He said it was a 1 in a million chance that it would have happened, and it did on my first oil change. I had the rarest type of synesthesia, lexical gustatory. It means I taste words. I was struck by lightning while talking on a landline. This was in the early 90s. Lightning struck through the telephone line and traveled through the handset to my ear. My parents drove me to the ER. I couldn't talk very well. My brain knew what I wanted to say, but my mouth didn't want to say it. I had a terrible stutter. My doctor told me that I had had a dose of good old-fashioned electroshock therapy. My speech was normal the next day, but I'd get a terrible headache whenever a thunderstorm comes through. I have an unknown type of autosomal dominant centronuclear myopathy. My type of it is so rare that they haven't even seen it before. Getting diagnosed was a multi-year struggle. They pretty much had to rule out everything else. It doesn't feel great to be in this club by myself. Countless blood draws, MRIs, CAT scans, and a biopsy and a genetic test. So far, it looks like my father and I are the only ones with it. Yay. As the researchers pointed out, this isn't really rare, just a type that hasn't really been seen in the population yet, meaning there is certainly more people out there, just not tested or diagnosed yet. In the future, I'll probably be 1 in 50,000 to 1 in 100,000. Sorry to make everyone think I was 1 in a million. I'm allergic to the cold. Like, literally. I get intense hives, swelling, I pass out, and throw up. Doesn't even have to be freezing. Below 45 degrees without a jacket, and I can't do it. I have to carry an EpiPen with me in the event that I drink something too cold or have a severe reaction. Bought $3 worth of pong balls at one of those games at the state fair. I think it was 10 balls, and the grand prize is in the middle, and you have to land it in a small glass container. I was having fun and just decided to throw it by flicking my wrist in a weird way. It bounced around for a while, and landed right in the red glass container, which was the grand prize. Even the worker was surprised that I got it. Had to walk around the state fair with a giant Charmander plush toy after that. Not quite 1 in a million, but close enough. As a child, I had an extremely rare autoimmune disease. On top of having an extremely rare illness, I developed the rarer and most dangerous of the symptoms. My kidneys started shutting down. Most kids recover from this disease, but not always the ones with kidney issues. I was extremely lucky. I did not have to go on dialysis, and my kidneys eventually reached normal functioning levels. It took a decade to be completely cleared of the disease. My mother likes to call me a miracle child, not only because of this, but because she was not supposed to be able to have a kid due to health issues, and had several miscarriages before my stubborn butt decided to be born. Weird stuff. I have symmetric bilateral coloboma of the iris and retina. Essentially, my pupils are shaped like keyholes instead of circles. A single coloboma is pretty rare, double coloboma is even more rare, and double symmetrical, well, you get it. I have a very rare skin disease that only 1 in a million people get. I've been told that I'll probably never meet another person in my lifetime with it. Hailey-Hailey disease for those interested. For those asking, I was diagnosed by a team of dermatologists. They had to take a biopsy of one of my many outbreaks. A picture of that particularly horrible rash is currently in a medical journal, or so I've been told. Yes, it is a very painful disease. Yes, I get steroid injections for it. I also get Botox injections to control sweating and prevent some of my outbreaks. No, I don't know if you have this disease. You have to get a biopsy. Yes, it's inherited. My mother was a carrier, and I've been told my grandmother had the disease for more than half her life. Hailey-Hailey disease is a rare genetic disorder that is characterized by blisters and erosions, most often affecting the neck, armpits, skin folds, and genitals. The lesions may come and go, and usually heal without scarring. Sunlight, heat, sweating, and friction can often aggravate the disorder. The symptoms of Hailey-Hailey disease occur because of the failure of skin cells to stick together, resulting in the breakdown of affected skin layers. Hailey-Hailey disease occurs due to a mutation in a specific gene that creates a protein that is essential for the proper health of skin. The disorder becomes apparent after puberty, usually by the 3rd or 4th decade, but symptoms can develop at any age. I was born 1 pound and 6 ounces in 1998. Doctors said I had like a 15% chance of surviving or something like that. They also said that if I did survive, I would have been a vegetable. So months pass. Funny thing was, I came out of the hospital on the day I was due, came out in February, left the hospital in June. Well, I am still forming as a baby, and it's 20 years later and I'm alive and healthy. I can walk, talk, and all the normal things. Only thing really wrong with me is my right eye is hanging on a thread because of reasons, and I'm socially autistic. I guess that's 1 in a million. I was so freakishly allergic to ant and bee venom as a child that a single sting from a single little common black ant put me into anaphylactic shock. When my allergist was preparing to start immunotherapy for me, he found that the in-office lab equipment wasn't sensitive enough to measure the infinitesimally small amount of allergen with which to start my titration, so he had to send a sample of my blood to Johns Hopkins so that their lab could determine how much to give me. I did immunotherapy for several years to reach an immune response level at which it would be safe for me to basically exist in a non-frozen climate. Good news though, I'm good now. I've had a few run-ins with ants and wasps since my immunotherapy, and my body didn't freak out and shut down. And research indicates that if it hasn't done that after this long, I'm probably safe for maybe forever. I don't have EpiPens and I'm not overly afraid of ants or bees. To answer a few questions, I live in Florida. I'm not outdoorsy, but stinging things are everywhere. It is, in fact, the Australia of North America. No, my parents would not move me to the frozen tundra to be a nomadic reindeer herder at my behest. Little black ants do, in fact, sting. Several Lassia subspecies have stingers and venom. When an ant bites you, that's using their mandibles and does not deliver venom. When an ant stings you, that's using their butt needle and delivers the pain juice. Most ants do one or the other. Fire ants do both at the same time. I did some research a while back and found an academic paper that indicated that if I hadn't had a reaction after this many years, the likelihood that I ever would again is vanishingly rare. I wish I could find it again right now, but I'm already late getting ready for work. So if I find it later, I'll post it. I feel completely safe having a cell phone instead of an EpiPen. I was actually homeless for 4 years between 19 and 23 years old. As silly as it sounds, I used to earn some extra money at the time by helping around in a Yu-Gi-Oh tournament. It was my biggest hobby when I was younger and was something I felt confident about. I also didn't have a passport or a bank account, so I couldn't get a normal job. I'm in the UK. Anyway, so at the time I was stuck not earning enough money, without a passport, a bank account, or a real job. In the UK, you won't get hired by 99% of companies if you don't have a passport to prove you have the right to work. So one day I got a phone call from a studio asking if I played Yu-Gi-Oh and would consider myself a geek, also if I wanted to be in a TV show. They said they would send me to another country as part of it. Being homeless, the biggest problems is being bored, so naturally I said yes, but told them I don't have a passport. No problem, we'll get you one straight away and pay for it ourselves. I ended up on a show called Geeks that you can still watch on Channel 4 OD. Because I got this passport, I was finally able to get a job, a bank account, and finally a house. Now I'm looking after my 10-month-old daughter who's playing while I type this. So Yu-Gi-Oh saved me from being homeless. I might be an anime character. TLDR, was homeless until a TV company gave me a passport allowing me to get a job and a house because I played Yu-Gi-Oh. This blew up more than expected, so here's some answers to some questions. How did you have a phone? I had a cheap brick phone that would run on battery for a week. Think old Nokias. I used to charge in my local library in Peckham, London. How did I help in Yu-Gi-Oh? I was a judge for the tournaments. They're a referee for the game. How did the TV company find out about you? I was a judge for the game. The TV show was looking for geeks with different hobbies, and they found out about Yu-Gi-Oh! After assuming a Google search, they found the person who ran my local tournament to recommend different players and people, and she recommended me. Why do you need a passport? So in the UK, you need a government picture ID and a national insurance number, like social security number, in order to prove you're allowed to work in the UK. I have migraines that cause me to go part or near completely blind, so I can't drive due to the risk. So I don't have access to a driver's license as ID, leaving me only with the passport. I'm getting some people who are a little doubtful that it could be so hard to get a job while homeless, or to get ID and are shocked it's taking me long to get out. What's important isn't what you know about the world right now. What's important is what I knew about the world as a 19-year-old that just left school. Think back to that age and honestly ask yourself how easy it would be to get a job without a bank, a home address, ID, or experience of anything. Of course now, as a 27-year-old, I'm armed with so much more knowledge to find a way out. I had 8 wisdom teeth. The dentist had never seen anything like it and called the whole office in to marvel at my teeth. Had pygmy glandular fever when I was 16. Nothing special about that. Had pneumonia a few months later, probably due to my weak immune system from the first disease, which caused my lungs to collapse, very unlikely for a 17-year-old. The hospital I was in couldn't do any more for me, so another hospital came with a rescue team of 8 people and a heart-lung machine, easymode. Very rare that hospitals have those that can be transported. The hospital only used it the second time and the first time successfully, to pick me up. They brought me to the other hospital. I was in a coma for a couple more days, but made it out of the hospital within 3 weeks after that, just before Christmas. A big newspaper wanted the story for Christmas miracles, but no thanks. I own a Lego minifigure called Mr. Gold. This particular minifig was to celebrate the 10th series of the Lego figurine line. They're sort of like grab bags. You can feel for them, but you don't know what minifigure you're really going to get. So, because they were celebrating, they thought it was a good idea to only make 5,000 of these. Anyways, when I was younger, and even now, I was really good knowing which figures they are simply by looking at the figure's pieces and feeling out those pieces. I really liked the minifigures because I thought they were really cool and unique, so I really wanted Mr. Gold, and me and my mom hunted for it for a long time, but after a while, I gave up. Then one day, I was at the Lego store and felt the distinct diamond piece and freaked out. Finding this figure was a downright fantasy. I'm 18 now and still want to relive 12-year-old me's pure joy as he opened the packaging. My dad once asked me for a quarter. I tossed it to him and it went directly into his shirt pocket. Guys, Dude Perfect is losing his mind right now. Doctors of Reddit, what's something you've had to tell a patient that you thought for sure was common knowledge? Have had to inform a few male patients that the condom only goes on the shaft and should not be pulled down to include covering of the testicles. How a shorter/fatter 5ml oral syringe held more volume than a skinnier and longer 1ml oral syringe. How does this hold more liquid when it's shorter? Also, I've seen almost every incorrect way to use an inhaler, upside down being fairly common. People taking birth control pills only on the days they have intimacy. I no longer assume anything as common knowledge. I'd rather have someone be offended that I explained something basic than to have something awful happen because I assumed the patient knew something. After putting a few stitches in a middle-aged guy's scalp, the family asked if he was okay. The attending joked that his brain was still inside. The family were stunned by this news. I, the medical student, spent the next half hour informing the family that the brain was inside the skull and that a person couldn't live without one. They thought that the brain was just a turn of phrase to reflect a person's common sense rather than an actual organ. Sort of the same as what they thought about the heart. I'm not a doctor, but I'm an ER nurse. I had a patient come in for an STD check. She was very upset and continued to tell me that she only had one partner. Progressing through my assessment, she further divulged that even if he was sleeping with other people, it shouldn't matter because he uses a condom every time and he makes sure to wash it thoroughly after every use. I asked what she meant when she said he washes it after every use. She explained that he washed the condom with hot water and soap before he used said condom again. I had to explain to her that condoms are a one-time use product. She had no clue. My dad is a family doctor in the States. A woman came in for a well baby check with their 6-month-old and she had what looked like chocolate milk in the baby's bottle, so he started explaining to her as kindly as he could that she shouldn't be giving her baby chocolate milk, at which point she interrupts him and says, "Oh, that isn't chocolate milk, it's coffee. He just loves it." If you're going to put it in your butt, make sure it has a flared base, or is attached to something you won't lose your grip on. Corollary, if you've already lost something in your butt, don't lie to the triage nurse and then medical team. While your story is usually amusing, we don't really care how it ended up in there. Pediatric nurse here. I've told more than one parent that their infant should not be drinking Dr. Pepper out of their bottle, or any other vessel for that matter. Viagra does not prevent STDs or pregnancy. Not a doctor, but a paramedic. During clinical time in the ER, 17-year-old came in with a bloody rectum/anus. Apparently, she wasn't wiping after using the bathroom, and it was basically really bad diaper rash. So the nurse had to call social services and explain to this girl proper wiping. I'm a veterinary technician. I once had to explain to a client that the ticks she had been frantically trying to remove from her male dog's belly with tweezers were actually his nipples. I also told her she had an extremely well-behaved patient dog. Not a doctor, RN in the ICU. I've seen some really stupid people over the years, but a few weeks ago, a patient's family member got into a verbal altercation with me over the fact that I was trying to freeze his mother to death. He kept pointing to the digital thermostat displaying a temperature of 23 degrees Celsius. We're in the US, by the way. When I gently explained to him that 23 degrees Celsius is not at all cold, he just kept pointing to the display and shouting, "You don't think 23 degrees is cold? It's 23 freaking degrees in here!" and acting insane. After multiple attempts to explain to him what Celsius is by myself, the charge nurse, house supervisor, and security, we finally gave up and had him escorted out. He was a man in at least his late 30s who's graduated high school and had never heard of Celsius and Fahrenheit. He literally thought we were making it up in an attempt to conceal my efforts to freeze his intubated, critically ill mother to death. Slightly graphic warning. Another vet here. Dead bodies decompose. If you leave your dead dog I euthanized in the back of your car on the hottest day of the year, don't come crying to me when its belly fills with putrefying gases and bursts. Demanding I cover the costs of reupholstering your car might be considered a little rude as well. A hospital is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for medical emergencies. So the next time you have a stroke on Friday, come in on Friday and don't wait for the weekend to pass. A child cannot have inherited any genetic traits from someone the mother has previously been with. Only one man is the biological father. My wife and I were trying to get pregnant, and due to possible complications, we were talking to an obstetrician. Towards the end of the visit, he tells us in all seriousness, "Just so you guys know, you have to stop using condoms if you want to get pregnant." We just stare at him a bit and say, obviously? And he just shakes his head and says, "You'd be surprised. There's been a few couples that really didn't realize that." My grandmother was the ignorant one getting in explaining. She was 18 and in labor with her first child. She was the kind of lady to wear pants in the late 40s. The nurse looked her up and down and told her to put on the labor clothes. So she took off her top and bra and got on the bed. The nurse is really confused. "Take off your pants too." "Why? It comes out my belly button, right?" asked Grandma. "No, darling, it comes out the way he came in." ER nurse here had to explain to a 27-year-old female that this bleeding she was having for a week every month was normal and why. She had 2 children, by the way. My mother is a nurse and has been for over 25 years. The only story of hers that makes me sick is the story of a man who could not afford Viagra. So he reasoned his cock gun should do the trick, right? It'd stay in there and keep him ready. So he put the tip of the gun in his urethra and filled himself up. Long story short, don't do that. Don't, for Christ's sake, ever do anything even remotely like that. Podiatrist buddy told me this one. Lady has to have foot amputated and is given waiver forms to sign pre-op. Buddy asks if she needs time to think about it. She's very nonchalant and doesn't seem to care much what they do. He gets suspicious and probes a bit as to why she's not more concerned. She says she gets that they have to operate and it's okay because the foot will grow back. He then has to explain she's not a salamander. Things get a bit more serious. Okay, but like salamanders are cool? Imagine if we could regrow our limbs like salamanders. That'd be sick. Not a doctor, but a nutritionist. I work with a lot of different patients, and I have tons of stories about food stupidity. Had a lady have bariatric surgery. Your stomach gets surgically stapled smaller. And her mother kept trying to force her to eat real food the day of the surgery when she was on a liquid diet. She would eat it, puke, rip her stitches out, repeat. We had to ban the mother from seeing her because she would literally blackmail and guilt trip this poor lady into eating a whole pizza, barf it all up because her poor post-surgery stomach couldn't handle it, and end up ripping out stitches and causing enormous pain because her mother was positive that she would die if she was on a liquid diet for a couple days. Another lady I was seeing for clinicals was diabetic, and she would come in every week with stupid high blood sugar levels, 250 to 260-ish. Not knowing why they were so high, she kept a record of everything she ate, and all of her food intake seemed fine. One day, her husband came with her, which was weird, and he ninja slipped me a note while shaking my hand. It read, "Ask her about the Quick Trip slushies. She doesn't believe me that they have sugar in them." So I asked her if she was having any soda, lemonade, tea, ice cream, shakes, or slushies, and she told me like a light bulb had gone off in her head. Well, I have been drinking about 3 of the 48-ounce Quick Trip slushies every day for a while now. They're just so good. And they aren't food or drink, they're slushies. So they don't have any sugar in them, and I don't need to record them. It was so hard to convince her that those are so full of sugar it isn't even funny. But seriously, 3 a day on a type 2 diabetic? It was one of the stupidest things I've ever heard in my life. A nursing home called 911 for a patient who was having difficulty breathing. When we arrived, a PA was standing in front of the patient, vigorously fanning the old lady with her hands. She looked at us and said, "I'm giving her some oxygen because we couldn't find a portable O2 tank," and keeps flapping her arms. Remember, this is a physician assistant, probably making $100,000 a year. I informed her that she could stop now, and my partner and I did our best to wait until we were outside to burst out laughing. Going off on a side tangent here, some people don't handle stress well. I volunteer as an emergency first responder, but one of the funniest cases I've seen of was out of uniform in an airport. A larger gentleman who suffered from COPD had taken a 6-hour flight. Upon getting through security, he had collapsed and was having difficulty breathing. The first person on scene to help the guy was a firefighter. I was second on scene, younger and smaller than the firefighter. I'm 6'3" and not skinny. This guy was just huge. So I'm letting him take lead as I run through making sure EMS is on the way, checking this guy's vitals, stabilizing his head and neck, big guy, went from conscious to unconscious quickly and fell straight down, and getting a history from his family. In the meantime, the firefighter's kinda starting to panic a little. He may have been new, or just the fact that he was out of uniform and not expecting it threw him. Either way, as the man regains consciousness and I start running through a quick GCS test, which involves me and the gentleman talking to each other and treating for shock, the firefighter tries to retake the guy's vitals. He fails to find a pulse. Understand at this point I am communicating with the patient. He's not completely lucid, but he is speaking to me and groaning. Having failed to find a pulse, the firefighter assumes this gentleman is in full-on cardiac arrest and begins to attempt to apply an AED to his chest. I say attempt because, along with being large, this gentleman was somewhat hairy. Now, in any first aid course for anyone that involves teaching one to use an AED, one of the first things you cover is that the razor in the kit is there in case you need to shave someone. The firefighter, having failed to realize that talking probably means the patient isn't in cardiac arrest and that he is having trouble getting a pulse because the patient is larger, then fails to shave the guy's chest. This leaves the patient with the 2 contact pads hanging off of his chest hair, but very much not in any way contacting his skin, while I've just started to realize what the firefighter was trying to do. At that point, fortunately, an older woman arrives and identifies herself as a trauma nurse, who are, by the way, just about the best people to have on your side if something like this happens. She tells him to go talk to the family, takes lead, and everything goes smoothly from then until the airport medical folks show up and take over. Unfortunately, I'm having trouble not laughing the whole time at the image of the firefighter staring intently at an AED that can't possibly give him a reading on the condition of the now conscious and lucid patient. TLDR, even people who should know better sometimes lose it under stress. Had a lady measure her baby's temperature by preheating the oven and putting one hand in front of it while the other hand was on the baby's forehead. She told the nurse her baby's fever was about 250 degrees. Lady, you either think you're the Human Torch or you don't understand how conduction works. I had an old lady come in with a massive bleed in her brain. She was pretty much gone. I had to explain to her tearful son that there was nothing we could do. He said that he loved his mama and he'd give anything for her. So he asked us to give her his brain for a brain transplant. I actually was left speechless for a minute and then had to spend another 20 minutes explaining why that was not possible. Mom brought her kids to the ER after they ate all of their Halloween candy because they had tummy aches. They were still eating Reese's peanut butter cups when they were in the exam room. I had to explain to her that they need to cut back on the candy, and she looked at me like I had 3 heads. For almost a month, my friend had random pains. Bruises started showing up randomly. He looked ashen, and what we first thought was him being lazy was actually him not having any energy. Finally, his girlfriend got him to agree to go to the doctor, who sent him to the ER, where it took several doctors to figure out what was wrong, either because none of them had actually seen it in real life, or they didn't think someone could be that stupid. Quote the doctor, "You have scurvy. Eat a freaking orange." Ooh, I've got another one. Inhaler technique. So we're told to always show a patient how to take an inhaler if they are new to them, and that we should check technique every so often. Yeah, you think. How hard can it be? Well, my senior once noticed that a patient was getting repeat prescriptions for an inhaler every week rather than every month. We brought her in to find out why. Oh, it just doesn't seem to work very well. I press it up to 50 times and it doesn't help. We were in shock over this. Salbutamol inhalers taken in excess, we're talking like 10 puffs taken in an asthma attack, can give you a thumping headache, a tremor, and a dry mouth. How is she taking 50 and not noticing? We asked to see the technique. Yeah. Turns out she was spraying it onto her chest. Internal face palms were had, and we educated her on how to take it properly. A PhD isn't that kind of doctor. Please don't show me that rash. During paramedic school, my teacher was a PA who told us a story of a lady that came into the clinic he was working at. She said she didn't feel well, nothing but general fatigue and not feeling right. He had the nurse do a standard set of vitals and a blood glucose. Her glucose was extremely high, so he goes in to talk to her. He asked, "Has anyone ever told you that you have diabetes?" She replied, "Yeah, a doctor said that I had that once and I took some medication for a couple weeks and felt better." He then had to explain to her that diabetes doesn't go away after some medication. I had the opposite happen to my wife. She was pregnant and had a thyroid nodule. We were concerned about how removal could affect the pregnancy due to changes in hormone levels and anesthetic during the surgery. We stated this concern quite clearly and in great detail. His response was that he will be operating on the neck and that it was nowhere near the baby. Thanks for answering a question we never had and ignoring ours. He was really pushing for surgery before delivery. We did not see him again. I work in a hospital lab. Quite a few years ago, there was a patient who was on our schedule for a semen analysis from one of our fertility doctors. The between the lines here is the patient was having some fertility problems. Patient presents us with a cup of urine. We explain that we need a semen sample, not a urine one. Confused why his first sample was rejected, he goes back to the private bathroom at the end of the hall. About half an hour later, he comes back with another urine sample, and that's when I literally had to have both a birds and bees talk with a man in his mid-30s and clue him in on the world of self-pleasure. This has actually happened twice now in my 8 years, and I found out about another guy when I was talking to my manager about it. The second time, I had a few thoughts. I could save these guys thousands of dollars by explaining how to have intimacy properly. Somehow, it never came up in the office that the wrong fluid is being used. I had to explain to a frantic mother that non-traumatic vaginal bleeding with abdominal cramps is normal in a 12-year-old. I tried to throw her a hint when I asked when the girl's last menstrual cycle was. She merely replied in hysterics, "She doesn't have menstrual cycles! She's only 12! I'll leave the diagnosis to your imagination. I'm a CNA at a nursing home. We got a new resident in and she had a huge bed sore near her tailbone region that had become infected and abscessed to the point that you probably could have fit a Coke can inside the opening. It had to be cleaned, packed, and have a wound pump attached to it every 12 hours. Turns out before she came to us, her family didn't think she needed any at-home help, so they would go over in the morning, get her up, bathe, dressed, put a Pop-Tart on the table for her, get her in her wheelchair, and go about their day. She was incontinent and would sit in the chair for 12 to 15 hours a day covered in her own urine and feces until they came back, wiped her off, and put her back in her bed for the night. Sitting all day in your own filth, it turns out, leads to bed sores. The day she was admitted to my facility, her family, my administrator, and everyone were all talking in a room. They had introduced us and let her know I'd be taking care of her at night from now on. She whispered to me that she needed to go to the bathroom, and I had to kick out my boss and her family because her son insisted that she can just hold it. She was never able to get over the raging infection in her wound, and it eventually killed her. It was one of those situations where I honestly wish I could have looked them in the face and told them, "You know you're the one that killed your mother, right? You killed her." Just as an update, yes, we tried to turn them in for elder abuse, but she was actually still sound of mind and realized what we were going to do. And so, she recanted her story and said she had never told us anything like that. She didn't want to see her son in jail for what he did to her, so she went to her death telling people things had just gotten out of hand and she was too weak. Paramedic here. Have informed numerous people that pouring Gatorade into the unresponsive diabetic's mouth is not a good idea. What you should do, call an ambulance. If they have a glucagon emergency kit, follow its instructions. Do not put anything in, on, near, or around their face. I've heard the powdered sugar and gums, etc., but if you expect an ambulance within 20 minutes, just lie them on their side and wait. Drink the Gatorade yourself. You deserved it. You just saved their freaking life. My mother who worked as a pediatric nurse. She had a mother whose child was putting on a startling amount of weight. This was bad since the patient's mother was obese and had diabetes, and they wanted to control weight gain for baby. So they went through the feeding schedule. Baby was due for a bottle during the checkup. The mother whips out a bottle during appointment. My mom is startled to see the milk is bright pink. She asks, why is the milk bright pink? The child's mother explains that her kid prefers the milk if it has strawberry quick mixed in and drinks more milk. The mom didn't get the connection between quick and weight gain. TLDR, don't feed your child the betas. It makes them fat from the start. IDOC here. Just today, I had to tell a patient that no, you should not attempt to continue wearing a contact lens that was dropped in the toilet. This is like a worse version of that eyeball licking trend from 2013, which actually turns out was a hoax. In a free medical clinic, I had to tell a mother that she should be brushing her 4-year-old's teeth. The daughter came because her throat hurt. After opening her mouth and using a tongue depressor to see her throat, the daughter squirmed like 4-year-olds are prone to do, and the tongue depressor hit her gums. Pus flowed everywhere, and the child wound up having to be put on penicillin before having every last tooth pulled due to severe infection. You should start brushing your infant's teeth as soon as they start teething, and do a gentle gum massage with a baby toothbrush before that. Use safe-to-swallow toothpaste before the child is 10. Let the child brush their own teeth as soon as they are able for practice, and then have an adult brush them at a 45-degree angle toward the gums in small circles. Children should be supervised brushing their teeth until they're at least 12 or longer if necessary. This occurred in Nicaragua, quite far from any major city, and wasn't reported because the mother did follow-up and kept the appointment for extractions. The thought of brushing her daughter's teeth simply never arose. Before modern toothbrushes were invented, people used bones, porcupine quills, sticks, and chew sticks. The ancient Romans had toothbrushes as well. Yes, you should brush your pet's teeth. Pet toothpaste only, no fluoride. No, I didn't murder the mother. She was provided with 6 months' worth of dental supplies for both of them and thoroughly educated on dental hygiene. Alright, now for the old switcheroo. My ex-mother-in-law was a pediatrician. However, her education was all from the 60s and 70s in Cold War Poland, and she hadn't practiced as a pediatrician for 30 years when our doctor was born. Like a lot of first-time parents, we read all of the books, and the vast consensus at the time was that the only thing babies need is mother's milk. So we set ourselves up for that, and the baby is thriving after a couple of weeks with our doctor telling us everything is fine. Mother-in-law comes to visit, and of course, we're doing everything wrong. We can't hold the baby right, we're being too attentive, we're not being attentive enough, she's too warm, she's too cold. I think you expect a certain amount of that, but then she starts insisting on giving the baby sugared black tea in a bottle. I'm not the smartest guy on the planet, but I'm smart enough to let the wife and her mom settle this between them. Lots of screaming back and forth. Showed her the literature from our doctor about nursing, all the references in the baby books, pulled down a couple of recent research articles, but the crazy old battle axe didn't give up. Finally, I caught her after we foolishly left her alone with the baby for a couple of minutes, trying to force her to take a bottle with tea in it. She yelled at my wife, "In a week, I will go back home and then you can do whatever you want with the baby." In a level voice, I told her, "That's what you don't seem to understand. We can do whatever we want with the baby right now." RN. Not an MD, but here's the story. Patient was a newly diagnosed diabetic who needed to be taught how to inject insulin. So the diabetes educator did the good old routine of taking an orange, drawing up insulin, then injecting it into the orange, then made the patient repeat it. Patient goes home, comes back in a week, and his blood sugar is out of control. They ask him if he's been taking his insulin, and he goes, "Of course." So they decide to ask him to demonstrate how he injects insulin. The patient goes, "Sure, I just need an orange." At this point, I started face-palming hard because I know where this one is heading. But of course, they got him an orange and a vial of insulin with the syringe. So the guy draws up the insulin correctly, takes the syringe, injects it into the orange, and then says, "And then I eat the orange." At this point, I had to walk out because I nearly lost myself right there. I once had a patient with a cancer diagnosis completely depressed about not being able to see their family anymore. I was confused because I had spoken with this individual's spouse and extended family who seemed supportive. There wasn't any indication of family problems. It turns out this individual thought genetic and family history had meant something similar to contagious, leading them to the conclusion that one should stay away from loved ones lest it be spread through the family. That was one clarification I was so happy to give. To those wondering how such a misunderstanding is possible, keep in mind that we ought not to judge. Not everyone has the benefit of a good education, nor is everyone part of a generation and culture that has always had medicine and science in their lives. Other times, language and jargon could be a barrier to understanding. I was not the physician that failed to communicate the issues effectively, but we were all glad that at least his problem could be easily dealt with. What disgusting secrets does your employer keep from its customers? The fajitas sizzle because we pour oil and water on a hot plate, not because we grilled anything. My whole life is a lie. Former employer was charging clients for a WAN backup solution that wasn't even running. I was still actively developing it when I quit. Client called up and asked to see the records of the backup. I said it wasn't running and that we didn't have any to my knowledge. Client flips out, calls boss flips out at me for not lying. Screw that noise. I used to work in a major movie theater and we would recycle hot dogs. Basically, if the links were on the spinning rack all day and didn't get purchased, they would be thrown in a bucket and refrozen. We poked a fork hole in one to see how long it would stay in rotation. 7 freaking days. Worked for a self-storage place in Rocklin, California. They made every customer sign a lease agreement that said that you wouldn't hold them responsible if your unit was broken into and things were stolen. I found out that we had 7 to 8 burglaries a year. The owners would get sued, but they would always get off because they produced the lease agreement in court and the judge would dismiss the case. One day, I came in from vacation to pick up my paycheck, and I found the owner and the manager loading up a truck with the contents from a unit that wasn't theirs. I went around the corner to an area where the fence allowed me to look in, and saw that they went to another storage space, cut off the lock, and proceeded to load up the truck with a telescope, big screen TV, and some power tools. I came back the next day and asked one of my coworkers. He told me that the owners of the storage space would sell the stuff they stole from renters, and that the manager and the owner did the same thing with another property that they owned in Granite Bay. I quit to go back to Sac State. I called the Rockland cops to tell them what the owners were doing, and they said that there was nothing they could do unless they were caught in the act. Tim Hortons Smile Cookies. Pay an extra $1 for a chocolate chunk cookie with a smile drawn on it. All proceeds go to local charity. Unfortunately, store owner would just go into the system, void all cookie sales, and replace them with regular chocolate chunk cookie sales. A small business owner for whom I worked several years ago kept deducting the employees' health insurance premiums but never sent the payments in to the carrier. After 2 to 3 months of this, our insurance was canceled right before one lady's teenage son was in a fairly serious car accident. She finds out at the emergency room, during what is of course an extremely stressful time, that she has no insurance whatsoever when she and her dependents have been fully covered. The next day she went into his office, very upset, to find out what happened. He gave his usual song and dance and made excuses for not having been able to send it in, and this normally mild-mannered lady picked up a stapler and threw it at him. He wasn't even injured. While doing that was, of course, unacceptable, I totally understood her frustration with this weasel. He spent thousands of dollars a month of company money, coding it to company expenses, at Sam's Club on groceries and big-ticket items for his house, on top of his already generous salary. Then to top it off, he actually took her to court for the stapler-throwing incident. After hearing the story, the judge dismissed the weasel's case and made a comment to the effect that if he were in the same position as her, he probably would have done the same thing. Used to sell cars at a major dealership. The unofficial sales contest was to see how much over MSRP they could sell the car for by confusing the customer on the price with payments and financing, manipulation of trade value, and sometimes outright fraud, like promising manufacturer rebates then not applying them. The winner, quote-unquote, for the 2 months I was there was over by $10,000, selling a car that should have been about $20,000 for over $30,000. The sad part is, the customer might never even know because they still got the payment they wanted. Please do yourself a favor and don't shop solely based on payments, and if you are financing, then make sure you are aware what the final selling price of the car is. There is a major difference between $400 a month at 60 months at 0% interest and $400 per month at 84 months at 0.9%. I used to work at Frisch's as a hostess, busser, drive-thru attendant. That place was filthy and corrupt as heck. No one in the kitchen wore gloves, and the cooks loved making people eat old food or food that had been dropped on the disgusting floors. The manager loved to steal the waitress's tips and blame the customers or the sketchy-looking bussers. The most corrupt thing the awful manager did while I was there was around Christmas time. He would take $100 out of each of the new/younger employees' cash drawer, call your parents saying that their kids stole the money and they needed to be brought in to be questioned. When I went to work the next day, I found out the same crap happened to a few of the others. We all got angry and snagged the key that locked the box to the camera controls, rewinded to the following day, and watched until we saw the jerk start doing his thing. Every single one of us reported him. He got insta-fired. It was glorious. TLDR, Frisch's is gross and my old manager was a corrupt jerk. I worked for a vet in Vancouver and I ran a whole month of raffles, nail cuttings for donations, and pet pics with Santa for the SPCA. When we added up the last of the money from the month, I put it in the safe. The practice owner's wife deposited the money and bought herself some new Chanel makeup. What the frick? I quit in disgust. We have a roach problem, and gnats are everywhere. Customers can see the gnats flying around the salads, fruits, and pies we have out, but I guess it doesn't disgust them enough to not come back. More than a few times, customers have complained about bugs in their drinks that ended up there after they died in our ice machine. The worst was a live cockroach in someone's salad that was on the fork as they went to take a bite. Whole cooked turkey breasts and roast beefs have been dropped on the floor and served without any of the managers and employees giving two craps. I've realized most restaurants are so much more dirty than shown, but I've eaten out my whole life. I guess my consolation is that I'm probably building up some immunities to all the ickies out there. I used to work for a local children's charity where a good majority of the money was skimmed to pay for the owner's for-profit business. I worked for a popular national pet store chain. We told our customers that we got our puppies from, quote, reputable breeders and not puppy mills. We got them from puppy mills, and I can't express how many came in on the back of a large, pitch-dark freight truck, malnourished, scared, and sick. We also adopted the cute kittens from the local shelters and charged customers outrageous amounts of money, most of whom just felt bad for the kittens. Don't support national chain pet stores that sell puppies that do not come from local shelters, folks. If you want a dog or a cat, then please adopt. Or find a stray, take it to a vet and adopt him or her. Also, donate whatever you can to local shelters. Food, toys, beds, money, etc. They could really use it. I just want to say that if you have ever worked at a water park, it will turn you off of visiting any kind of public pool or park for the rest of your life. The things we pulled out of those filters, man. No. Just pour so many chemicals into the water that literally nothing can live in it and call it a day. Macy's doesn't donate anything to charities. They practically force their employees to and claim it as company donation. I worked at Dairy Queen. The collection box supporting children with cancer hanging out in the drive-thru window was a discontinued charity. My manager pocketed all the donations. Disgusting in a different sense. Back when I was a warehouse manager for a major office supply chain, one of my duties every month was to gather items from our inventory that were selected by corporate to be donated to local charities. All items would be collected, scanned, placed on pallets, and loaded onto the trucks to be delivered to the charity distribution center. After a few months, I started to notice that some of the donation items that should have been shipped out mysteriously ended up missing or being used in my general manager's office. I later discovered that on the days that the donation items were collected, my manager would send me out for lunch and revert the scans on whatever donation item he desired in order to keep it for himself. I eventually caught him in the act as I returned early from lunch, and needless to say, he was not able to come up with a good excuse. Instead, he insisted that I take my pick of whatever I wanted from the pallet. I was so disgusted that I immediately put in my 2 weeks notice during the busiest time of the year and filed a complaint with corporate. My last job, we held events and refilled premium liquor with house crap. And during events, charged consumption tabs with 100 plus people, extra shots and bottles that were never ordered so the event holder can pay for something never even used at the end of the night. And that's just scratching the surface. My boss refuses to hire anybody but white women, and he uses rubbing alcohol to wipe the expiration date off of product if it expires. He just puts it back on the shelf, including dairy product. I hate him. For reference, this was 9 years ago, so hopefully he's been fired at this point. This happened years ago, but I was a receptionist for a chiropractor for about 6 months. One day, our first appointment came in. I went in the back to look for him. I walked in on him screwing a coworker on the table, the same table the patients sometimes would lay face down on. I went back to the front and said, "He'll be with you in a couple minutes." God, I was disgusted. He was married with 2 young kids. I didn't work there long after that. Worked store security. There are peepholes above the ladies' changing rooms at several major retailers. Supposed to be for female security agents to monitor the dressing rooms, but we had no female security agents. Lots of creepy voyeurism / self-pleasure going on. Private company I no longer work for. The company list of vehicles included 2 4-wheelers, a Corvette, a Hummer II, a brand new Jeep, and oh right, a 20-foot fishing boat. Also frequently bought company furniture which he would then sell to himself. Government contractor and a weasel. Okay, this really took off and I'd like to clarify a few things. If you have a small business and your cars are company cars and your office is in your home, power to you. Starting a business takes a lot of work. The main problem that I had with this guy was his general selfish nature and lack of respect for anyone. I can't go into details, but there were 2 big projects going on at the company at the same time. One under the government was defense-based, the other which was an invention that he held the patents for was aerospace. He used every trick in the book to siphon the government contract money into the private projects so that he could reap the benefits, generally treated employees like dirt, and was just such an unbelievable jerk. I recently worked for another government contractor and my boss there was nothing less than stellar. Using a throwaway. The company I worked for had to maintain a trust account where money owed to clients was kept and then they were paid out of it. There was a small lag of about 30 days between when the money came in and when it was sent to the client. This was a highly regulated industry. For more than 3 years, the company hadn't been paying their clients and had been fudging the books. I found this out when I was told to stop sending reports that showed clients were owed money. I pressed management and found out they had been lying to clients for well over 3 years. And one client was owed $1 million. I should also point out that in this particular industry, this client was in the top 3 in the nation. We're talking about thousands of companies owing tens of millions of dollars. I was instructed to lie to the clients until they were so fed up they threatened to sue the owners, then they would get paid. This was common knowledge in the business. It was openly discussed with customer service. Until I filed a formal complaint with the regulatory agency, none of the more than 100 employees had ever reported them. Not one. And I know why too. After I gave proof to the regulatory agency and quit, they swooped in and seized the company books. And all of my allegations were true. Instead of filing criminal charges against the executives involved, the regulatory agency just fined them and then made them pay back the missing money to the trust. No one was charged with the crime, no one lost their job, no one was put on probation. Absolutely nothing happened to those responsible, and the only consequence is that they have to have regular audits. Screw the government. I worked for a gelato shop that made us dig through the so-called recycling bins to fish out used plastic cups and spoons to wash and give to new customers. Even if the spoons had bite marks from other customers and were coated in chewing gum, we were told to wash them up and only had to throw them out if they were really unpresentable, because these things are expensive. Furthermore, all the other stuff in the recycling bin that people so good-heartedly placed there, yeah, all of it got thrown in the dumpster. Customers ate it up and told us regularly how glad they were that we were a green business who cares about the environment enough to recycle. It didn't take long before I just couldn't keep doing this with a clean conscience, and I turned them into the health inspectors, who were obviously horrified that this was happening. About 2 months later, I got laid off and the business closed its filthy doors forever. They leave sites like Reddit unblocked just to see who is slacking and fire them. One of the few benefits of performance-based jobs is that as long as you're getting your crap done, you can throw that right back into their faces. A few years ago, was working as a call center drone, and the boss of my boss sent me an email regarding the amount of non-work-related internet usage from my computer. I just sent him a metric spreadsheet showing that I was, by far, his most productive employee. Didn't even write anything in the email. Never heard anything else about it. I worked as a supervisor at a water park, and just before inspection by the owner, the director had me go around the park and paint all the rusted metal silver to look like new. Some of those bolts were nearly rusted through and were crucial to the ride's construction. Valet here. I've seen a number of occasions in which rubbing compound was used to cover up mild to moderate scratches. Coworkers have stolen things out of cars, from spare change to a handgun on one occasion. If valet is an option, don't do it. Just want to add, I've never stolen anything out of someone's car. Also, yes, all valet companies are different, just like not all restaurants spit in your food. I valeted my car one time. I thought, nah, they won't steal my stuff. Wrong. They stole lots of stuff. I used to work at Victoria's Secret. We are required to refund and take back any used underwear as well as everything else in the store. It would then immediately go back on the sales racks even if it had obviously been worn. I showed my manager a used pair of pink panties that had a disgusting smell that resembled tuna, and she advised me to just spray perfume on it. I didn't quit immediately because I needed the money. Instead, I would grab a pair of scissors from the back and accidentally cut the ones that I knew had been used, so they had to damage them out and not sell them. I work in designer clothing retail. The clothes are quite expensive, and the assistants are required to only wear full-price garments. So we, the whole team, just pick clothes off the rack, wear them all day, including lunch and bathroom breaks, and at the end of the shift, replace the tags and put the clothes back on the shelf for the customers to buy at full price. I know I was grossed out my first day there. If you come into Geek Squad with a computer under warranty, we are required to at least perform a $70 diagnostic on the computer before sending it out for repairs. If viruses are detected, that price goes up to $190 for the removal. I have had to remove viruses from a client's laptop and then send the laptop off to get the hard drive replaced. Also, $30 RAM installations are per stick of RAM. Seriously. One time our department was doing poorly in sales, so they brought in a specialist to give us an after-hours training session. He opened up with, if anyone is stupid enough to walk through those doors looking for a repair, they deserve to be charged $189 for it. I hated that place. In the store I work at, the warehouse is a complete fire hazard. The electrical boxes are screwed, and things get thrown on them all the time. In the way it's set up, if there was a fire, we'd be boned. There's wood by all the ceiling sprinklers, which would absorb most of the water, and pretty much all our fire extinguishers are several years past expiration. I'm highly considering calling a fire marshal. We can see you. I look after instant photo booths remotely. I see all your stupid faces, all of them, every day. I changed the name of a sushi roll from the Ultimate Roll to the Miami Heat Roll and raised the price to $17. Instantly became the best seller. That's not disgusting. That's marketing. Kudos. And this happens all the time. It's genius, not horrible. Take a look at what bars do. They'll have a special drink in which they have taken another drink and renamed it for double the price. After graduation, one of my roommates from undergrad went on to the University of Texas at Austin to do a master's degree in advertising. At first, he was super excited because the program there at UT was the best of its kind in the country, and he really liked Austin. However, by the end of it, he had totally changed his outlook on advertising and actually ended up going into a different industry. Apparently, his last semester there, the students in his program had to do an internship with a real company and help them come up with an advertising campaign. One of his friends at the program was really excited because he had gotten his internship with Jack Daniels. However, their view on advertising was completely shattered when his bosses at Jack Daniels literally told the guy to go to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and figure out what they would have to do to get those people drinking again. I once worked for a small retirement home that was owned by a church. I was the night watchman, and during the night, I could smell the odor of feces wafting down the halls. Everyone could. and the nurses at the nurse stations would typically wait until their mandatory rounds times to deal with it, so they basically let residents lay in their fecal matter. I'd say about 10% of nurses actually give a dang about the residents. All the other ones are just there to get paid. I will never go into a nursing home. Okay, as somebody who's worked in elder care for a while, let me explain. There is no such thing as truly great elder care in a retirement home, unless you pay a crapload of money or go into a 24-hour facility in Thailand or the like, because there you get one-on-one care. There's decent care, where the patient's basic needs are met and they're cared for the best that the understaffed nurses can manage. And then there's awful care, where the old people are lucky if they get their diaper and urine bottles changed more than once a day. It's not possible to give people with dementia or impaired bodies all the time that is necessary when you're understaffed and underpaid and are barely able to rush through the important stuff that needs to be done. You've got women and men crapping themselves at least 3 times a day, and if you're really unlucky, it's the same person every time, and you run out of clothes for them to wear and stick them in a nightshirt, and that is, of course, the first day in 3 months that the relatives decide to visit and get angry because why is their mother, father, or uncle in bed before tea time? Which is all fine. It happens. You deal with it and move on. But every time you need to change somebody or clean somebody or help somebody to the toilet, it throws you back between 10 minutes and half an hour, and that's time that some other patient would have needed. And what you can't finish isn't picked up by your colleagues because they're equally behind. Because you're 5 people for 35 patients and they all need at least 3 hours of your time, which is 2.5 more hours than you can give them. If you're lucky, you gave everybody the right pills and the right food and the right kind of diaper so that they won't get open sores on their butt. And if you miss something ultra necessary, you better hope the next shift catches it. Because if not, it's you on the line, and the excuse Mrs. X pooped her pants and put her hands down her underwear and smeared it on the wall of the hallway and I had to do damage control is not going to fly with anybody. And let's not even get started on what happens when a medical emergency happens, because instead of running to the MRSA infected patient who's been in hospital 3 times in the last 2 months and has been dying for even longer, you walk slower and are relieved when they're dead, because now they won't have to slowly wither away in pain. I worked overnight dairy at Walmart for a few years after I moved, had 7 years total with the company, and hated every minute of it. So in the dairy, we often get returns, stuff that has been left out in the store, and it's our job to put it back up. No thought is given to how long these things have been left out. They're put into a cart and wheeled into the cooler. It doesn't matter if it's a gallon of milk that has been sitting out 5 minutes or 5 hours. It goes back into the cooler and probably back on the shelf. This is done in the name of expediency, which is what drives every policy at Walmart. Things don't get done right, they get done fast. So with milk, if a dairy employee finds it outside the cooler, it probably goes on a return pallet, because we know better than to put room temperature milk back in the cooler, and the store gets a refund on milk we send back to the milk company. Not so with regular employees, who, as they are trained, put it in a basket, wheel it into a cooler, and hand it off to the next guy, who probably is getting crap from his manager to get this stuff back on the shelf. Eggs? Eggs come in with general freight. They don't do returns on eggs. Once again, if a dairy employee picks them up, they probably get ditched in the giant bin of milk, eggs, flour that sits outside the cooler and ferments and smells terrible, but at least it's a good 5 feet from the candy bins, so it's not like any cross-contamination is possible, and never see the shelf. However, same thing as the milk. It could be sitting out for a week. It'll get put on a cart and wheeled back to a cooler, and someone will yell at someone else until it gets put back on the shelf, because nobody likes getting yelled at. While working there, I came down with food poisoning on at least 3 occasions, none of which I was allowed to go home. I walked out on the 3rd after I puked in a mop bucket, told my manager about it, and then found out that mop water, which was probably a day old in the first place, was used to mop the cooler because nobody ever told the employee on duty to change the water. This is ignoring their terrible policies regarding how they treat employees and train management. Don't buy food at Walmart because it might be cheap, but you're getting what you pay for. Ex-cons of Reddit. What's the worst thing that happened to you while doing your time? Serious replies only, and some pretty messed up stuff ahead, so fair warning. Did 7 in Pennsylvania State Prison. Saw a guy who was accidentally cleared by psych to be in general population go out to yard to try to cut his own head off with the razor wire. It was morning yard, not a lot of people out, and he sprinted towards the fence as soon as he got out there. We all thought, oh crap, we've never seen someone try to get over these forests of razor wire, but then this guy turns around with his back right up against the fence, cops coming from 3 directions yelling into their radios, and he loops a circle of razor wire around his neck and starts sawing. A waterfall of blood. Cops froze, everyone froze. That was really unexpected. They told us he lived, but screw me if I know how. Since you're asking, it happened at SCI Somerset, down in the lower yard. Yes, most of the razor wire is up on top of the fence, but there's a single run about 8 feet up the face of the fence, maybe to just discourage you from testing out the rest of it. He found this one section in the corner of the yard where the fence makes a bend, where that run was sagging down enough he could reach up and grab it. I always thought the pain reflex of holding on to razor wire would have made him stop, but nope. The craziest part is that prison can be months and months of literally the same thing over and over, like everything's painted the same color, then that guy's over there trying to cut his head off. Oh wait, huh? Like that. And prison doctors suck so hard. Probably gave him ibuprofen and sent him on to the hospital. He did it because he was crazy. The first day I was assigned to a new unit after being sentenced, DUI 90 days. I got put in a 5-man cell. It wasn't my first time locked up and had been in the jail a few weeks, so I wasn't too nervous. The guys were cool to me all evening. All 4 had done time before in much worse prisons. They were all playing cards, and I didn't know the game, so I sat on my bunk reading. They started off saying weird, cryptic gay stuff, random stuff regarding Vaseline and who was cute on the block, etc. It ramps up over the course of an hour, then they start playing strip poker. Meanwhile, I've been hearing every word they say and studiously ignoring it. They got bored of being subtle and began saying awful stuff about screwing each other. I ignore everything, while secretly getting scared that they're going to do something to me. Eventually, all 4 got up, shirtless, and they trapped me on my top bunk and started grabbing at me. I yelled, "What the heck?" And they collapsed in laughter and spent the next 48 hours telling everyone who'd listen. TLDR, new guy in 5-man cell, they pretend they're gonna gangbang me. I suppose seeing people getting taken advantage of all the time and then not caring was the worst. New guys coming in and getting ripped off on trades and stuff. People with social/developmental issues just getting their food taken from them. Also, the psychology of people without goals gets weird. What was worst was just becoming part of that world. There are so many people there that have their rights taken away from them on a regular basis and don't care anymore. They choose to place value on being able to make others fear them. They stop thinking about the world beyond the walls and just get all wrapped up in the weird culture of the place. There was a day I was feeling proud of myself because I was running around organizing contraband trades, setting up poker games, and owning things like hardcover books and the only dice in the place. In that moment of pride, I realized I started to lose my mind. It's honestly hard to remember the months in there because most of the time, nothing's freaking happening. Nothing. You've read until you can't stand it. You've slept all you can. You can't play cards because your cellie is sleeping. So you stare at the ceiling and wait. It's so weird to realize you're doing the equivalent of time out for months. You're not waiting for 5 minutes, not waiting for 5 hours. You're waiting for a day that is months away. Just waiting. TLDR, it's like being in a DMV with a bunch of idiots and your number isn't up until next January. A user reminded me of the other thing that was awful on the human psyche. You're not really a person in there. You might have people that care about you on the outside, but they're still living their lives. The guys you play cards with are just trying to pass time, just like you. The officers don't care. You're just another pain in their neck. You just wear the same linen pajamas every day and just exist. 12 months on the inside. Very first day in prison. Very first day. I was in line for supper and this big guy comes up behind me, squeezes my butt, and whispers in my ear, "Are your panties wet?" Scared crapless, I turned around and the guy jumped back and said in a friendly tone, "Oh, my mistake, mate. I thought you were someone else," and left the line. I still laugh about it to this day, but during the time, it messed with me. Actually, he was a big solid who did honestly mistake me for his boy. I did 3.5 years in Texas prisons. I believe that the worst story I can recall was my first full day in a state jail facility, used as a transition center for up to 2 years before one is sent to a real prison in Texas. A guy came up to me asking if I smoked cigarettes. I didn't, but thought, why not? So he told me to head to the gym when that time came later that afternoon. We went to the gym and fired up a cigarette while we walked around the basketball court. As we were walking around the court, we approached the universal gym machine where a variety of people were using the various pieces to work out. The guy who offered me the cigarette advised me to follow him to the other side of the basketball court and to stay away from the universal gym. A few minutes later, a guy sat down and leaned back to do some bench press when 4 guys grabbed him, one on each arm and one on each leg. 2 other guys pull out cans of chili, or refried beans as both were available, in socks and proceed to hammer the guy in the face. The guy at the bench press had his face completely caved in. All I could think was, what have I gotten myself into? I also recall one other time when I was at the pre-release facility at the Beto unit where a guy had his face cut up with a box cutter and his throat slit over $20. The guy who died even had about $40 worth of cigarettes on him when he died. I never had anything happen to me directly per se. There were a few fights I got into over various things, usually just respect. Processing into LA County Jail just after the first showers. Everybody is lined up to proceed to the next stage of processing. We were told to leave our towels in a pile on the floor and step forward when your name is called. One Hispanic fellow was called but did not speak any English. He was still carrying his towel. The deputy commanded him to stop and leave his towel in the pile. He did not respond. One deputy used his taser on the dude while 2 others dropped knees on him. The guy was rolling on the floor screaming apologies in broken English and Spanish. The guy received 1 warning. A few of us tried asking other Hispanics to inform them of the rule before we got to the deputies, but no further effort was made. I realize this isn't the worst tale in this post, just goes to show that violence happens for totally silly reasons in jail/prison. Been in that shower line before. Nuts to butts, they scream at you. Smells like balls, sweat, and hangover. Worst imaginable place on earth. I remember I was housed in Old County, a dingy, cockroach-infested, overcrowded, dirty section of LA County. You could wait up to 5 days just for a bunk, just sleeping on a concrete floor, eating bologna sandwiches. No blankets, no pillow, nothing. Once my bunk was available, they took me upstairs with 10 other people in the gang module. The cells are tiny, built to fit 2 inmates that pack 6 to 7 guys in there. The 7th person has to sleep on the floor. You get showers every 2 days, so a lot of guys shower in the toilets. While we were in the holding area, I saw them take out a body wrapped in a set of bloody sheets with the bloodied bunk mat not far behind. Apparently he was a blood that was thrown into a cell with Crips. Freaking nuts. When I finally get to my cell, the gate slams shut behind me. 5 of the biggest, blackest dudes I've ever seen in my life. A huge graffiti piece on the cell said, "Rollin' 60s Crips." That's Compton for those of you that don't know. One of the gang members comes right to my face and asks, "What's your name, white boy? Is it Bubba? Ain't you all named Bubba?" I knew I was in for a wild ride. Luckily, things went pretty smooth. Minded my own business and didn't get anything sharp in my neck or blunt in my butt. Still one of the most insane places I've been in my life. Absolute mayhem. Did 4 years, 4 months in a prison in Colombia, South America. For most people that are sentenced to more than a year, prison becomes a vacuum cleaner that sucks up your savings, your marriage, and relationships. It is a really hard time for most. I was engaged at the time. She hung in there for about a year and we parted ways. For you, life screeches to a halt, while life rolls along on the outside. One interesting thing that happens is that prison is like a filter that sorts out who your friends really are and who are your real friends. It goes the same with family. Prison is also hard on you psychologically. You have time, a lot of time, to think. For most people, being left alone with their thoughts can be stressing. One thing that would reduce any tough guy into a quivering coward was the word remisión, which is the term used when they transfer convicted inmates to other prisons around the country. No one wanted that. It wasn't a good thing. While I was there were riots, got tear gassed a bunch of times. One time, the big boss gave the order that every cell block barricade themselves, and one cell block took a couple of guards prisoner. This was on the news and it was a big deal. They brought in the GRI, Group of Immediate Reaction, sort of a SWAT for prisons. These guys came seriously armed. When they ran in front of our cell block gate, all the guys ran into the cell block. Me and 2 other less experienced convicts stayed by the door watching, when one of them stood in front of the door and pointed his H&K MP5 at us. I don't know anything about guns, but the other inmates were calling it out. We put our arms in the air. The guy next to me starts screaming, "Don't shoot us, we are not armed." The other guys started praying, so I called out the same thing. "Please don't kill us." The GRI officers start yelling, "Shut up and pull your pants down." We do exactly that and we took our shirts off for good measure. The guy tells us to get on our knees, hands on top of our heads. We're only in that position briefly because shots ring out from another cell block. The guy and some others run toward the gunfire and me and 2 other guys run into the cell block. The first thing the prison does is cut off the power, phones, and electricity. We were on lockdown for 2 days. It was really intense and I really thought we were done for. One night, everyone is in bed sleeping when suddenly someone starts screaming in pain. I thought that someone was getting killed. I was scared out of my mind because you have nowhere to run and nowhere to go. But I started hearing people getting up and talking. It turned out that a roach crawled into the guy's ear. After that, it was toilet paper in your ears when you go to sleep. One day, a young kid got caught stealing some old guy's disposable razor. The old man was begging the houseman not to hit the kid, but it was too late. Examples have to be made. We all had to stand by and watch this poor kid get beat like an animal afterwards. I wasn't the only one with tears in my eyes. Another terrible thing was on visiting days, we would all bunch up at the gate of the cell block waiting for our visits. You would see a new inmate receive his visit and most would break into heart-wrenching sobs. That was hard to watch, mostly because you remember the day it happened to you. Mothers, wives, brothers, sisters, they were all heartbroken and it was your fault. It just sucked. I guess what I'm trying to say is that it wasn't just one thing, it was many. Sorry for the long post. I saw a guy with swastika tattoos on his body befriend a flamboyantly gay black man platonically. Turned my whole world upside down. Actually, for all I know, it could have been a flamboyantly black gay man. Either way, it was sweet. While waiting in jail to go to the PDC, there were 5 guys from my block that liked making people fight. They made up stories and stole things, and then would act like your buddy and say they found your stuff in this guy's bunk. I was warned about this. They finally targeted me and this guy twice my size. Luckily, he was warned too. They stole my deodorant, which is a prize where I was, and put it in his bunk. They told me where it was and I acted mad. Then we all went to his cell. The big guy looked at me and said, "You stole from me. No one steals from me." I winked at him and began lightly slapping him. He laughed and slapped lightly back. We both were yelling. Everyone laughed and I got my deodorant back. The 5 dudes saw we knew what they were up to and moved on to other new inmates. Even though everything worked out, I was secretly crapping and wetting myself to oblivion in my mind. I'm glad there's at least one wholesome post to separate all the awfulness. Did 3 weeks in county for basically being at the wrong place at the wrong time. I had just turned 18 and had never been in trouble, not even in school. I was interrogated in a small room by a huge undercover agent with a stash who told me that they knew I was the ringleader and that he would make it his personal mission to see that I spent the rest of my life in jail. Did not know any details, so I said nothing. When I was put in a cell, my cellmate was a 6'2" bald Mexican gangster guy, and every night he would loudly pleasure himself while I clinched my thin bed sheets in fear of not sleeping until I knew for sure I no longer heard him. I was released for lack of evidence. Good times. I'm going to give you a family story. My cousin got into some cocaine and heroin problems shortly after his mother died. He did a robbery at knife point on a local shop where my brother now works. Anyway, he goes away for 10 years, serves 8, and was released 3 years ago. He has a wife and 2 kids and is doing really well, so happy ending. The story that comes to mind is during his 5th year, he is one of the longest serving members of the prison, short stay prison in England with only a few people serving sentences over 2 years. Anyway, he gets a guy living next to his cell and starts chatting with him in the cafeteria. They become friends, and after about 3 months, people think nothing of it. But 3 months after he arrives, the inmates break into the back office of the prison and find everyone's records. They found out my cousin's mate has been transferred to this prison because his last prison found out he was a kitty fiddler and he was moved for his safety. My cousin gets told flat out while at dinner one day, "So-and-so, he's been done for kitty fiddling. Do something or you both get it from us." Fearing his safety, my cousin goes over and whacks the guy straight in the jaw with the tray, breaks his jaw and a couple of teeth. My cousin proves he was not sympathizing with the kitty fiddler and didn't get his head kicked in, sent into solitary confinement for 2 weeks. This isn't something that happened to me, but it's something I observed while in. My life was uneventful in my time, which was only about 4 months, and only during nights because I had multiple releases. Anyway, our jail was divided into sides and floors. The higher up you were, the worse of an offender you were. 1L was the floor with the men with releases or protective custody. 1R was women. Up through 5R and L were serious violent offenders. 1L was 12 individual cells, about 5 by 8 feet, surrounded by a larger cage, 1 TV in the dead middle. Our floor got the new arrivals who mostly, myself included for the first 2 months, had to sleep on rubber mats in the floor. One day, a young black man whom I knew from childhood was moved onto our floor. He'd been in the system since about 12. He had finally been granted work release. The guards hated him. All the guards were white. They didn't pull any punches. This was the year 2000. He was about 19 at this time. The night they moved him in was uneventful. The next morning, his release was for 6 a.m. to be at work at a restaurant at 6:30. The overnight guard was a jerk who loved doing things like dropping our food or releasing us late or holding us for an extra inspection or whatever. That morning, he was too busy to let this inmate out until 9 a.m. Our only phone was collect, and he did, for whatever reason, turn it off that morning so none of us could use it. Kid finally gets out, his ride still waiting, and beats feet to work. They actually let him work till noon, at which point he came immediately back like he was supposed to, during which time they made him sit in the sally port for about 5 hours without food, water, or bathroom. So he gets in after dinner and goes back to his cell, pretty dejected but not being bad or disrespectful. The next morning, they do the same thing. He gets to work and the manager can't do much but fire him, so he comes straight back to work and calls his PO on the way, and she calls the jail to tell them that he won't need his release the next day. So he comes back on the floor and pretty much immediately gets on the phone with his lawyer and family trying to find a new job. Cue the big fat guard dog. She comes walking down the floor outside the second cage laughing, saying something like, "How was work, X?" To which he responds, "You know how it was." And she, I swear to God she says this, says something like, "Shoulda known a lazy N wouldn't go to work on time. Looks like you're going back upstairs with the rest of the monkeys." We're all kind of appalled that she'd say that, and we're all white dudes. So he says something like, "Don't you have anything better to do?" Which is of course what she was hoping for. "Lockdown," she says loudly, which is where we all go back to our cages or mats. We all abide. She gets on her walkie and says her close first left and locks us all in about 3 hours before normal time. He says something like, "You ain't gotta take it out on all these dudes. They didn't do nothing." And she says, "Shut up, inmate, on your knees." Now you have to remember that she's about 6 feet in front of him, and none of us can see because we're all in our cages. Only the cage next to him can see her really, because he's in the last cell. So she starts screaming at him, calling him names, making fun of him, nasty, nasty stuff. So he calls her a dog or something. She pulls out a can of bear spray and just hoses him down and the rest of us by proximity. Then she calls in the response team, which is just one dude and his dog, and they haul the kid out, not fighting, in cuffs and drag him away, leaving the rest of us to wheeze on pepper spray for the rest of the night. That was one story. I could tell you about the guy with the wheelchair or the littering guy or lots of stuff. Thanks everyone for your comments. I didn't expect this to get big. I feel like I've had a pretty wild life and I love talking about the crazy things I've done. 8-time felon Eagle Scout EMT with SAR dogs? Okay. I've worked in youth residential group homes, worked as a counselor, taught public school, had to restrain lots of folks, been stabbed by students, been deposed for very technical ADA-related issues and big lawsuits, and I'm happy to share about all of it because I think our stories could all be shared. For the record, I was originally charged with 28 felonies and something like 15 misdemeanors for breaking and entering. Effectively, the DA took every single unsolved B&E from the previous year and charged me with it. We couldn't afford the $10,000 my lawyer wanted to go to trial. That was after the $10,000 he charged just to represent me. So we took a plea bargain of 8 felonies and 3 groups, all B&E. I was supposed to receive 1 to 10 years in the state pen for each one, but the judge realized that things weren't what they seemed, and instead grouped the charges and sentenced me to 3 to 30, suspended it, and gave me 6 months in counting with releases for work, school, and community service. So I pretty much just spent the night in jail for 4 to 5 months. Really lucky and really not too bad. I won't say that I was innocent, but I also won't say that I was remotely guilty of what I was charged with or what I pled guilty to. My PO, that's another whole series of stories, decided that I was the poster child for reform and had me speak to her interns about recidivism and corrections, and then for an unknown reason decided I was bad and tried 3 times to revoke my probation, all unsuccessfully. I graduated with a 3.7 overall GPA in 2003. 8 months inside, and one instance always sticks out in my mind. I was running out of phone minutes and spending what precious time I had left talking to my child. We didn't get to talk as much as I liked, had unfortunately more important people to talk to. Lawyers, trying to find jobs for my release, etc. This jerk comes up. I need the phone. Hold on man, I only got a couple minutes left. He takes the phone and slammed it into the crappy payphone holster and abruptly hung up on my daughter. Still breaks my heart because I cherish every minute I can have with her. I worked as a guard in a military prison for 4 years, and after reading the stories in here, I'm glad I didn't transition to federal corrections when I got out. The things I read about in here. I didn't see either, but my buddy witnessed 2 events. One where a guy in the labor yard took his shovel and full-on swung it into the side of a guy's face, shattered his jaw and dropped like a sack. He lived. After his surgeries were done, he was transferred to a different facility. Another guy was an MP who was the arresting officer of an inmate. When the MP was sent to the jail, I don't remember what he did, probably some possession charge. We had a few prior MPs in the jail. He didn't remember the guy at all, but the inmate broke his jaw with an elbow coming out of the shower one day. His wasn't so bad off as the first guy, he stayed for the rest of his sentence, but was kept in a different block than the other inmate. The head cook was pimping out her female cooks to the inmates. Their families would wire money to the head cook, who would then get that inmate assigned to kitchen duties so she could screw the female cooks. As a result of this, we had to man an extra guard to stay in the kitchen at all times. The head cook was sent to Leavenworth, and the 2 she was pimping out were dishonorably discharged from the army. Outside of that, the worst altercation I've seen was 2 inmates fighting in a block and knocking the TV over. 40 inmates in the block collectively went, "Oh crap, no." And once the fight was over, they were all asking us to check on the TV and hoping it still worked. Didn't give a crap about the 2 bloody idiots we took to segregation. That TV though, fortunately it did still work. Put it back on its stand and plugged it back in and came right back up. The place I was at was mostly pretty laid back. We had a saying, it's 365 days of boredom with 5 days of excitement. It's worst in the hot days of summer and around Christmas. Tempers flare and everyone is depressed. Oh, there was also a time where a female guard was doing a block check and walked into the shower, which wasn't on, and found an inmate laying along the wall, head and neck on the floor, back and legs up the wall, pleasuring himself because he was trying to eat his own emission. She wrote him up for that. It was freaking hilarious to read that report. One guy had a heart attack in the rec yard. One of the inmates we had was a ranger medic. He was there because his chute line got stuck jumping from a plane and he shattered his jaw. Seems like there's a trend. And when he recovered, he had permanent jaw pain. Since he was a medic, he kept writing his own narcotic prescriptions so he wouldn't have to see the doctor, which is a big no-no. So he was sent to jail for drug abuse. Anyway, when the inmate had a heart attack in the rec yard, we sent a newbie private to run up to Delta Block for this inmate because he was the only one the guards knew had any experience with this kind of stuff. When the paramedics arrived, he gave a full account to them of everything that was going on and very well could have saved that guy's life. I spent a short amount of time in a county jail. The first morning, they came and handed out those small cardboard cereal boxes that come in variety packs. I remember wolfing down the cereal as I hadn't eaten in a day or two and was starving. They then came back around and served the milk. I was angry. What's the most legendary thing that happened at your school? My school was on a hill and the tallest building in the area. During Fleet Week, the Blue Angels flew what must have been 100 to 200 feet above it, shattered like 30 windows on the top floor of the school. I attended a high school called Rampart that, despite being a blue ribbon school, had serious budget issues. The budget problems got so bad that the principal started renting out the school gym to anyone willing to pay up to use it. Some guy rented the gym out for a Saturday night, saying he was going to hold a church dance. Instead, he held a rave that got so out of hand it destroyed the gym. The incident quickly grew into legend amongst the students. Many claimed to have been there or to have known the guy who threw the rave. We weren't able to use the gym for the rest of the year. They kept the doors locked, but there were constant attempts to force them open so we could see the damage. It didn't take long for the students to start referring to the school as Rave Part, and whenever we had to sing the national anthem, we would finish it in the home of the rave. The next year, we had a new principal too, but we never knew if the old principal was fired because of the rave incident. 2 teachers screwing in an empty class. They thought they had locked the door. A student caught them. They were both fired. We have a school news channel that sometimes did live segments about new stuff going on. This was every morning in homeroom. One morning, they were doing a walkthrough of the new part of the school just built. They walk into a staircase and some girl is sitting on some kid's face on the floor. This is at 8 a.m. and the entire school saw it. Some dude in English class sat next to the electrical outlet, so he decided to grab the kid next to him and stick a piece of metal into the outlet. Shocked the heck out of both of them. They were both fairly okay, but almost scared the teacher to death. Also, there was the time a girl screwed 2 dudes in the auditorium during a basketball game and it was caught in the school camera. Her family ended up sending her somewhere else after that. This happened at my school in the UK around 2002. We had an indoor swimming pool at my school that was always really cold, and one particularly freezing December day, a bunch of us decided that we really didn't fancy having to do swimming for PE, so we dared this kid called Todd, who was pretty crazy, to crap in the pool. He said he would do it for 10 pounds. We had a quick whip round and managed to get the money pretty quick between us. To avoid getting caught, he decided to crap into the pool from the roof through a skylight. A lot of the buildings in our school had staircases on the outside, so it didn't take much effort for a couple of us to give him a leg up onto the roof. Once he was up there, we ran back down to the pool and looked through the windows. Sure enough, after a couple of minutes, we saw 2 or 3 of Todd's crap apples drop into the perfectly still pool, causing a gentle, disgusting, but oddly beautiful ripple. There was no PE for us that day. There was a huge sexting scandal where a handful of girls' images were being sent around. Well, when the school caught wind of it, they did the only thing a school could do. They held an assembly. Girls in the auditorium and boys in the gym. After an hour or so of, "you shouldn't do that," they had the district attorney come in to talk about the legality of underage sexting. One of the seniors stood up and asked him if it was legal if they were over 18. He said yes, and the entire place went nuts. Everyone was cheering, clapping, and laughing. The principal walked over to the mic and said, "Who asked that?" The guy stood up again and triumphantly said, "Zen Master Steve!" The audience once again erupted into cheers as he got called into the principal's office. I watched a friend sneeze and hit their head off a desk so hard that they gave themselves a concussion. There's a tradition here in Australia that the year 12s, final year of high school, usually have a day called Muck Up Day, where they play pranks or whatever in the school. Well, one year, the year 12s decided to screw with the whole school and placed roadwork signs and cones on one of the main roads next to the school. They diverted all that traffic through the school, essentially screwing up a lot of people's days. It is the best thing anyone has done on Muck Up Day at our school. At the school where I used to teach, the students told me that years ago, someone swapped the science teacher's Bill Nye video with the hardcore adult tape. According to legend, the teacher didn't notice for quite a while, and the students watched several minutes of smut that day. I told my class that it was a stupid rumor, and I'm sure that never happened. When class was over, one of my students walked up and said, "Mister, it's true. My brother was the one who switched that tape." Went to a boarding school, so several screw tapes and photos got leaked. This was 2004 to 2006, so before iPhones and whatnot. This mainly happened due to a program called MyTunes, where you could share your iTunes and movie libraries on the network. So people would accidentally drop their videos and photos into the folder that was shared without realizing it, and people bored looking for new music or whatever would stumble upon it. Once the administration found out about a video and the student was 18, allegedly, he had to watch the video with the president of the school in his office in order to determine that it didn't happen on campus and that both participants were of age. Didn't get in trouble at all. I mean, glad that he didn't get in trouble, but could you imagine the awkwardness of having to sit in an office with a supervisor watching your own screw tape? I took an A-plus course in high school. We had an all-right sized lab room for stripping computers and another room full of computers for other worker lessons. There were a few stuffed animals in the lesson room as a half-hearted attempt by my teacher to decorate. Those come into play later. My teacher kept finding certain history on one of the computers. It was always horribly spelled or incoherent searches, and she assumed it was a freshman being smart to impress his friends during a different class. One day she gets fed up with it and makes a special project for us nerds in her A-plus course. She gave us one of the lab computers and the smallest cam she could find and asked us to make a hidden camera. We complied and made a decent one and brought it into the other room, set it to record with more than enough hard drive space and aimed it at the perp's pewter. The next day we fire up the vid and see one of the seniors coming in before school starts, Googling some videos and giving himself the old wax job. He cleaned up with one of the stuffed animals and went about his business. She threw out the stuffed animals and the cops got involved. Kid got into trouble but went into the army after high school, so maybe it all worked out in the end. Sorry, the stuffed animal? It didn't do anything. Why that? Why Teddy? My junior year, the seniors put hay everywhere inside the freaking English building, where it basically looked like a farm. One of the admins wasn't even letting people look at the mess inside. Also, when I was in second grade, my school was supposed to have a fire drill, so for some reason the alarm wasn't going off. The lunch ladies decided it would be a good idea to set something in the kitchen on fire to make the alarm go off. They burned a good majority of the lunch that was supposed to be served that day. My high school was a bit on the sketchy side. During my sophomore year, there was a fire, and despite all the fire drills we'd been doing since kindergarten, no one really knew what to do. Some students made their way 10 blocks away to a Wendy's and a Waldbaum's, where they proceeded to rob both. At the end of my junior year, this sophomore threw his freshman girlfriend through a display case. She ended up with 13 stitches and he got a lovely pair of handcuffs. In my senior year, we got a new principal because the old one quit at the end of the year prior. Anyway, this was the year the 5th Harry Potter book came out, and even before the school year started, people were calling her Umbridge because of her reputation at her last school. Most of us thought she couldn't be that bad. Then we met her. She really was awful. To make matters worse, she was racist to boot. One of the black teachers didn't agree with her teaching style, so she fired his lazy butt, in her words. Within a week, the NAACP was at the school. Before she finally resigned, there was a student walkout and people started throwing cafeteria fruit at her whenever they saw her. We were all glad to be rid of her. When I was in grade 9, I was sitting in the computer lab working during the communications class. All of a sudden, we hear this loud revving getting louder and louder, something passing by very quickly then fading away. Our teacher ran out of the room after it, and crike, I had no idea the man could move that quickly. I was in crutches due to a sports injury, so I had to hobble out behind the rest of the class as we tried to find out what was going on. Apparently, one of the seniors brought an ATV to school and drove through the halls. What was legendary was that he somehow was never caught. This was in Canada in the early 2000s. There's a video floating somewhere on Facebook, which probably means it's lost forever. Pretty crappy since it was literally one of the early digital cameras taped onto the guy's helmet. If I remember correctly, they let him in through an unused auto classroom side door and he rode out the back. The area was very rural, so he probably drove it in instead of in the back of a pickup. Most likely rode it straight home too, so yeah, no proof at the end of it. A guy from my high school thought it would be a great idea to streak through the halls on the last day of school. After running around buck naked, people who witnessed it began whispering about some guy streaking. Pretty soon, the entire school was talking about this unknown mystery guy who ran around with his willy out. Biology teacher witnessed it and said, maybe he's just chilly today, but he isn't very well endowed. Soon after, he went to the front office and turned himself in. He apparently walked into a room full of administrators, all women, and just said, it was me. They all busted out laughing and said, just don't do it again, okay? Low blow from the bio teacher. Viewers, it is time for me to regale you with the story of Jeff. Jeff jumped off the roof of the chapel into a dumpster filled with empty cardboard boxes. 50-foot drop, 8x8 dumpster. Twice a week at our school, the junior and senior guys were on garbage recycling duty after lunch. We'd gather all the garbage bags and recycling from the classrooms and offices. The building was a school attached to a church with offices and a sort of community center. It wasn't a huge building, but it was pretty big. We'd take out all the garbage and trash out to the dumpster, which was set next to some sheds behind the building. That's how it all started. Jeff jumping off a 10 to 12 foot shed into a dumpster full of cardboard boxes. We'd laugh, roll the dumpster out to where the garbage guy could get to it. Someone else rolled it back when the garbage was collected. One day, Jeff climbed the backstop of the baseball field right near the dumpsters. That was a 25 to 30 foot drop, I think. He made that one look easy. Then he dropped in from out of a tree. That was probably about 40 feet. Finally, about a month from our graduation, he told us his plan. He had to break into the crawl space above the chapel, accessible by a padlocked trapdoor on the 3rd floor of classrooms, then climb up through the attic space of the chapel and onto the roof. The chapel parking lot sloped sharply by about 7 to 8 feet, which is where the 50-foot drop comes in. We saved boxes for weeks, set them up at the dumpster, put it in the parking lot about 15 feet from the chapel wall, and watched him jump. Our school has a huge statue of a Mustang at the front because our mascot is a Mustang, naturally. It's about 40 feet up above the entryway, so everyone sees it. One morning, there was a bright pink adult toy on it because Mustangs are male and our huge statue was neutered. It took them a while to get it off of there because they didn't want to ruin the statue or leave any piece of the evidence behind, and it was too heavy to remove from its place, so there it stayed with a banner hung across the entryway blocking the statue. Nobody knows who did it except for the masterminds of the crime. For information, the school was in southwest Pennsylvania.
Ha! Took him a while to get it off!
My first day of high school. I was starting at a whole new neighborhood from moving and knew no one, so I kept to myself. I didn't handle crowds all too well, but I mustered the courage to get out of bed and get ready for school. I ran downstairs and talked to my dad about what I expected to get out of the day and ate breakfast. I walked out to the corner to catch the school bus, and that was awful. Nowhere to sit as everyone felt they each had their own dang seat. Story short, I made it to school. As soon as we made it to the school, I started walking to my locker. There were so many people, I was about to lose my mind, and I asked myself if it could get any worse. It did. A girl bumped me from behind to get ahead to catch up with someone. In one swift action, she ripped off her backpack and unzipped it to pull out a kitchen knife to stab the girl directly in front of me right in the back. I froze. I couldn't breathe. I felt dizzy. I turned around and walked straight home. I lived about 10 miles away. I just kept walking. I never looked back. I just wanted to make it home, crawl upstairs, and sleep in. One hot day in June, when I was in 6th or 7th grade, there was basically a riot at our school. Pretty much every kid in the school at lunch recess gathered at the office entrance to the school and started chanting, "It's too hot! We want to go home!" It was pretty incredible. A teacher at one point came out and said, "We're calling the police," to no avail. Finally, the bell rang, and everyone cheered and went inside. No one I've talked to remembers this event. A student accidentally butt-dialed his mother while the class was watching Platoon. The SWAT team showed up. Apparently some of the guys a few years ahead of me got into the principal's car, took off the brakes, and pushed it up a makeshift ramp to the roof of the shed. I don't know how we got it down. The guys in my year managed to swipe the vice principal's smoking pipe. They put up ransom posters everywhere. In another class, they managed to get into the ceiling tiles and plug socket, so they took an old phone with a dirty ringtone and a charger and left it up there. For whatever reason, because of acoustics, the sounds seemed to shift around the room as you walked. The number got passed around so people could call whenever they needed to disrupt the class for a while. 853 missed calls, 2 missed SMS messages. Seems like every couple months you practice fire drills, and one day the alarm goes off. We start making our way down the stairwell and there's smoke. I get outside and say to somebody, "Wow, they make these fire drills so realistic, smoke and everything." The reply I got back was, "The school really is on fire." So, yeah, my school caught on fire. That was legendary. I'm not the brightest tool in the shed. Somebody! Kid gets yelled at, runs out of the school into the woods. Helicopters come and search for hours for the kid. School goes on lockdown. SWAT team finds him a mile away eating Snickers in the woods. Comes back next week like nothing happened. I saw the whole thing out the window. Very crazy. Happened last month. For 5 consecutive Halloweens in a row, someone managed to set off a smoke bomb in one of the stairwells, causing the school to have to be let out early. They do it just after lunch, after most everyone had just entered their first afternoon class. It was amazing. Like, heck yeah, getting to go home 2 hours early on Halloween. A massive Roman candle fight involving about 50 kids in the middle of the field on Halloween night. Every Easter, our religious education teacher bolted a big wooden cross onto the wall and people could volunteer to go on the cross. You stood on a little platform and there were leather straps to hold your hands in place. He said that if anyone stayed on for longer than 5 minutes, he paid them £5, but nobody ever managed it. This was 6 years ago. 2 years ago, the app Yik Yak was growing in popularity at my school. Maybe about 25% of the student population had it, but since it's anonymous, people just started roasting other people through it. Just as people were no longer using Yik Yak, our craphead principal heard about people roasting other people. He made an announcement talking about Yik Yak and digital citizenship. Naturally, everyone re-downloaded the app, and anybody who didn't previously have it downloaded it as well. Word quickly got out that some teachers got Yik Yak as well and were monitoring it. People started to post stuff like fight in the art hallway and laugh as a group of 3 teachers would speed walk by then towards the art hallway, only to find out there was no fight and see the next post fight in the cafeteria. This went on for 45 minutes until people moved on to better pranks. I'm pulling the fire alarm next period. Our craphead principal misread this as firearm and called a lockdown on the school which lasted for 80 minutes, and there were cop cases all around the school. Later that night, my school was on the news, and Yik Yak is now blocked within 100 meters of any school in my school board. TLDR, my school got Yik Yak banned in my entire school board. Maybe it wasn't just my school board, maybe it's all of Canada or something. I'm really not too sure. I went to a professional training high school. We had to choose a major for our senior year, and on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we would spend the entire day in classes involving our chosen major. Strange, yeah, only lasted for a few years. Now it's just a regular magnet school. Whatever. Here's my story. My tech teacher was cool as heck. He'd give us a project on Tuesday morning, and we'd have until Thursday afternoon to turn it in. If we were done early, have fun on the internet. If late, well, that's a strike on your grade. Most of the students busted their butt on projects on Tuesdays, so we could watch Jerry Springer on the TV cart in the back of the room on Thursdays. Me and 2 other kids would play Warcraft 2 on the network computers we set up. Seriously, this teacher didn't give a crap as long as our work was done. One Thursday, one of the students in my class was flipping around the in-service channels the school had. Sometimes they would play a movie on it for some class. Guess what? Adult films. Hardcore black-on-black adult films. Student quickly turned it down and turned the TV from the line of view of the teacher. Teacher still heard it. He came over, coffee cup in hand, looked at the class, looked at the TV that wasn't turned off in time, looked back at the class, took a sip. First off, if anyone offended? No. Keep it low. If someone comes in, turn it off. I hope that teacher is living their best life. A guy drove through the school on a dirt bike. He was doing wheelies and dodging the supervisors who couldn't catch up to the dirt bike on their golf carts. Then, later that day, he posted the video he recorded of the whole thing from a GoPro on Twitter. He was a legend. I was in an all-boys high school, and this is just one of the many pranks and stuff we did. This happened a few years before I was in the school, but one guy decided to get back at one of the old crappy teachers we had whose class was on the 2nd floor. He decided to purposefully not do his homework to get in trouble as to set the plan in motion. She was also constantly picking on him, and that day he started crying, fake obviously, and saying he can't take it anymore, etc. He then proceeded to jump out of the window onto a high jump mattress that was placed underneath the window by his friends. Before the teacher could look out of the window, they removed it, and he went to lie down on the ground in a manner which resembled a mangled body. The teacher freaked out, went to fetch the principal and nurse, etc., and before they got up there, he got up and went back to class and sat down at his seat as if nothing happened. Teacher was speechless. Like I said, this happened a few years before I was in the school, so I didn't really hear about the aftermath of their shenanigans. It's also possible that it never happened, and that it's an urban legend going around. In high school, we weren't allowed to wear costumes for Halloween. My senior year, a giant group of us, about a good half or 3/4 of the class, decided that we were going to dress up anyway and meet in the parking lot before school to march in together. I spent the night before making my costume, which was a suit of armor made out of cardboard with metallic tape, a sword made the same way, and one of those broomstick horses. The next day, we all gathered like we had said and marched in together. It was hilarious, but I guess they found out, so the deans and assistant deans were waiting for us in the cafeteria to take our IDs so we could report to detention. One of my friends had dressed up as an ATM that he made out of cardboard. When they asked him for his ID, he was ready and slipped it out of a slot like a debit card. The best part was at the end of the day when we all gathered for detention. They didn't have enough room for us and all the other people that were there for other reasons. Out of frustration, they decided to make our detentions Saturday ones and spread them out. It was totally worth it though. Strap in, this one's a long one. At our school in the UK, on the year 11's final day of the year, they would do Egg and Flour Day, essentially pelting the lower years with eggs and flour. This was a long-standing tradition at my school and went back decades. As you can imagine, with parents understandably annoyed at the sight of the kids coming home covered in mess, the school received a lot of complaints. Because of this, the school clamped down on it in the past 2 to 3 years with huge punishments for those caught taking part. To get around this, the year 11s typically moved the location to somewhere off grounds where students could be ambushed on the way home, typically the local shops. Anyway, it was our turn. We were the year 11s now. We wanted to make our mark. A group of around 10 or so of us got together towards the end of the year and started brainstorming. It took us about a week to come up with it, and it was perfect. Or so we thought. Here was the plan. The school was recently going through some renovations, so a few things were moved around and a few areas were off limits, including one of the fields. Now, this field was where we would go in the event of a fire drill. Because of this, the fire drill point was moved to the tennis courts. Great. Why was this great? Because the tennis courts bordered on the local woods. The very edge of these woods were bordered by incredibly dense growth that was very difficult to see anything through. Between the growth and the tennis courts was a 10-foot fence, and just behind the growth was a pathway. Perfect. So the plan was set. We'll send a guy inside, get him to pull the fire alarm, then send a barrage of eggy flower death to the unsuspecting lower-year peasants beyond the fence. Skip forward to the day of the event. We sent Tim in to be the man on the inside. We were ready and waiting in the woods, armed to the teeth with pancake ingredients. We waited a long time. It must have been an hour and a half at that point. We'll come back to this later. This was before mobile phones, so we had no contact with the man of the inside, an oversight. We sent in Christian to find out what was going on, and we waited. Not long this time, 20 minutes later, the bell went off. It was happening. First, we could only hear the piercing ring of the bell. A minute later, the loud chatter of many prepubescent voices. It got louder and louder. The tennis court was filling up. Students were getting into their lines. We waited for the perfect moment to strike. A few more minutes later, things quietened down. We started to hear the teachers shooting out names, going through their registers. This was it. Time to strike. With the students now silent, it was time to unsilence them. Without saying a word, we unleashed. Cartons of eggs were emptied into the air, over the fence and down onto the underlings into the most satisfying crack splats. Flour baggies were spilt and tossed over, leaving trails of white smoke before landing with a puff and filling up the area with clouds of potential biscuit. The screams, oh, they were glorious. The complete sound of chaos. It started with silence, shock as to what was going on. Then the fear set in. Nobody wanted to be egged. The tennis courts exploded into a mass of running kids, dodging yolk, trying to get out of the way. Teachers trying to find out what was going on, barking orders and trying to calm everyone down to little success. And that was it. Within 60 seconds, we had exhausted our ammo and it was time to retreat. Laughing hysterically and celebrating our accomplishment, we melted back into the woods and fell back to our meeting point. It was done. We were legends. Now let's fast forward a week. Remember Tim, the guy on the inside who took too long pulling the alarm? Turns out he didn't pull the alarm, because we noticed they were all covered by CCTV, another oversight. When Christian went in, he didn't bother looking and pulled the first alarm he came across. He was called into the school a few days later and ordered to give a list of names. It was either he did or prom would be canceled that year. Can't blame him really, I probably would have done the same thing. Those who were on the list, the choice was either 8 hours community service in the school or be barred from prom. We all took the service and spent the day with the school caretaker doing absolutely nothing. It was great. 10 out of 10 would egg again. What happened at a wedding that let you know the marriage was going to end in a divorce? The groom looked drunk and the bride seemed incredibly angry. Then there was this woman walking around during the reception placing bets on when they would divorce. I later found out she was the mother of the groom. The groom said in his speech, "When I joined a dating agency, I never thought I'd be so lucky as to find my own personal cook, dishwasher, and washing machine. Not only is that a crappy way to describe anyone, he's in for a nasty surprise when he realizes his wife is actually a complete diva and will expect him to do all those things for her. Bad relationship all around." Groom's mistress found out he was getting married and showed up at the wedding, in the middle of the I-do's, walked right up on stage and smacked him in the face, pulling a Will Smith slap before the Will Smith slap even happened. The groom stabbed his new brother-in-law to death with the knife used to cut the wedding cake, no less. Well, technically it happened at the reception, not the wedding. Yeah, like that's a detail I was worried about, and not the fact that somebody was stabbed to death at a wedding. Backstory. About 4 years before the wedding, the wife's brother had shot her in the leg during an argument. Yes, alcohol was involved. At the reception, he started loudly telling the guests that he wished he'd shot her in the head instead, at which point the groom got stabby. Alcohol was, again, involved. At the rehearsal dinner, the groom's mom is in tears because he looks miserable. And he was. We all knew it. During the vows they had written for each other, the bride starts with, "I know I could be a pretty terrible person, and I don't know why you've stuck around, but that's all going to change starting today." They were divorced a year later. She flinched when he turned to kiss her. They were divorced within 6 months. The bride had the minister put "till death or divorce do us part" into the ceremony. My cousin, the bride, told us as she was going from table to table thanking the guests that she didn't think it would last. We were stunned. They lasted about a year. I thought my sister's wedding was. Her husband got blackout drunk and they got into an argument. He passed out and she ended up throwing a bucket of ice water in his face to snap him out of it. She was devastated about it. Happy ending? He made it up to her big time. Also, he felt very out of it, even the next day. Turns out he had traces of Rohypnol in his system. His own brother roofied him in hopes he wouldn't marry my sister because he wanted their own friendship to remain the same. My brother-in-law has disowned most of his family because of this, and his brother just got out of a 4-year prison sentence. The bride, whom I didn't even know, apparently designated me to help decorate the reception hall prior to the wedding. I went to do so, and her mother was there, telling me in a hushed, scared whisper that I better not mess anything up because the bride would be furious. Everything was to be a certain way, and if it was wrong, there'd be hell to pay. I gave her the benefit of the doubt, chalked it up to wedding anxiety, and during the reception, I tried to chat with her a bit, and she literally rolled her eyes at me. I also didn't see her look at the groom once at the wedding or the reception. They were split less than a year later. Later, the groom confided to me and my husband that the morning of the wedding, he'd been filled with an overwhelming feeling of dread and spent several hours just sitting on his lawn thinking, I shouldn't do this. But it was paid for, tons of guests were waiting, lots of family, including us, had come in from out of state, and he felt he had to go through with it. Apparently, the bride had a history of being awful and controlling. No clue what made him propose to her in the first place. Edit. Just Facebook stalked the ex-bride. Her latest status update is announcing her wedding date with a new guy. Someone jokingly asked in the comments if they set a date for the divorce. Oh snap! Holy crap. My cousin Jan's wedding was basically just a preamble to an elaborate dance of divorce that we all knew was coming from the moment the engagement began. For context, this took place 15 years ago in the backwoods of North Carolina. My family is just a generation or two removed from snake handling in church, so some of the wackiness is the product of upwardly mobile inbreeding and redneck gumption. Just a few things that come to mind. Her fiancé proposed to her over the corpse of her father. He was over with the family watching TV when Jan's dad collapsed on the floor. He died before emergency services arrived. Her boyfriend grabbed her hands as she was sitting next to her father's body, pulled her up to her feet, and then asked her to marry him. He later said that he didn't want her to get away. The fiancé then disappeared for a month the week after the funeral. Nobody knew where to find him. The bride's white trash mother told Jan that she had to get married within 4 months because she, the mother, my aunt, planned to move to another state with her new boyfriend to avoid bill collectors. When Jan's fiancé showed back up, he was cagey and weird. Eventually, it came out that he'd been living with his ex-girlfriend because she insisted that he had to give to her a month of his life or she'd take him to court for child support that he was supposed to be paying on their infant son, but had never paid. Throughout all of this, Jan continued to insist that she wanted to marry him. My mother and I did most of the wedding prep and arrangements. Jan's mom, despite insisting on the 4-month timeline to help pay for the wedding before her move, never contributed a dime. And we were both pretty convinced that the wedding was going to be canceled at any moment. But the day arrived, and so did the principal players. At the wedding itself, the groom walked around drinking PBR out of a massive travel thermos with a novelty straw and told everyone who would listen that Jan was a good starter wife. Jan threw several tantrums about stupid stuff, including one in which she accused the groom of stealing her drink. He told her she was a dumb woman, but it all worked out because she then found her drink. The groom pulled the ring off of Jan's finger during the reception and swallowed it as a joke. The groom picked a fight with his father because his dad had asked the ex-girlfriend to stay at home, and the groom had really wanted her to be there. Jan was in the dark about this invitation until the fight broke out. Epilogue, shocking precisely nobody, except possibly Jan herself, they eventually did divorce. Eating the ring caused the groom some discomfort, so they had to cancel their honeymoon to the mountains so that he could go to the ER and get hospital-grade laxatives. They lost money on the cancellation and the ER visit, which they really didn't have to lose. That resulted in some immediate debt problems, and they lost the trailer they planned to rent when they couldn't come up with a deposit. That resulted in both of them moving into the groom's parents' home into his old bedroom. Things went downhill from there. The groom's ex-girlfriend popped back up less than 3 months after the wedding, heavily pregnant with a second child. She went after him for another shared month, but Jan wasn't cool with it. The ex ended up taking him to court for child support. Jan got a second job to make ends meet while resigning herself to living with her in-laws for a while longer. One day, after he dropped her off at work, the groom sold Jan's car. He then disappeared for several more weeks. She lost both jobs and shortly thereafter realized she was pregnant. The groom accused her of cheating because he thought he couldn't have more than 2 children in a lifetime, and his ex-girlfriend had already filled the quota. As I understand it, this is what ultimately caused the rift in their relationship. Back to normal stories. Groom got caught getting frisky with the bridesmaid. That marriage lasted for about 2 hours. When the father of the bride tells the groom, "How can you marry somebody like her? You are too nice. You deserve better." Surely enough, the marriage lasted less than 3 years. During the whole time, the wife was doing drugs and prostituted herself to get money for drugs. We knew the couple was in trouble when they frowned during most of the ceremony and later didn't go on a honeymoon because they couldn't agree on a destination. They had plenty of money, just no desire to compromise. At the end of the reception, the guys were sitting at a table away from everyone else talking, and we asked the groom why he proposed. His answer? Because she was naked. Marriage lasted about a year and a half. At my brother's wedding, his bride gave him the cheek at the "you may kiss the bride" part. Yeah, she ended up cheating on him with some guy online in less than a year. My sister's new husband made out with the bridesmaid on the dance floor of the reception. During the ceremony, when the priest started asking the bride, "Do you take this man to be your..." she started laughing uncontrollably and couldn't stop. It was cute for about 10 seconds and then things got real uncomfortable. They lasted a year and change. We all kinda knew the only reason they were getting married was because she got pregnant. Groom got so drunk at the reception he passed out in the honeymoon suite by himself, but not before he latched the door so it couldn't be unlocked from the outside. Seeing the bride kicking the door and hollering at the top of her lungs to be let in at 3 a.m. was not encouraging. They divorced like 2 years later. I was working at a wedding factory. On Monday, we got a call the Saturday wedding was canceled. They were told that they would lose the deposit, around $7,000. Then on Thursday, they said it was back on. When the guests arrived, everyone was mad. It seems they told everyone that it was off, then 2 days later that it was on. The ceremony was about 3 minutes. The bride then changed into sweatpants and then everyone got angry drunk. Well, this won't last long, I thought. Then on the following Monday, the bride walked into my then-wife's divorce attorney's office. Our friend was the girl who had spent a whole year setting up for the one day. They had taken 6 months of dancing lessons, and she has spent a ridiculous amount of time looking good and dressing up her bridesmaids for the wedding of which my wife was one. So, come the night of the wedding, the groom meets up with his old friends and starts to get blackout drunk. He got so drunk he didn't even recognize us, rather just pushing us aside to get to the bathroom. The worst part was the dance itself. It was really heartbreaking to see them stumble around and watch the panic on her face as he realized he had no idea what was going on. I gave it 6 months at the time, but they ended up 3 years. She ended up marrying another woman. Groom mashed the cake into the pregnant bride's face so hard she went down backwards. Groom and his father ended up fistfighting in the bathroom, cops were called, fun times. It was a shotgun wedding. They proudly proclaimed it as such. Overheard the bride's mother saying that the bride was such a later bloomer for waiting until 19 to trap herself a man. The child is 3 years old and they have been separated, don't know if divorced, since she was 1. Walking in on the groom getting railed by one of the groomsmen in the suite at the resort during the reception. My cousin's wedding. The groom invited his ex, who was also the mother of his 1-year-old son. He and my cousin had been dating for longer than 2 years, and my cousin, who was then very pregnant herself, got into a loud screaming match with him over it in a bathroom. They eventually came out and got married, my cousin with puffy red eyes from crying that you can see in every wedding photo that was taken. They spent $50,000 on a Disney wedding and the bride spent 0 time anywhere near the in-laws for several hours. She ran off a week later. While saying the classic "I do," instead of looking deep into his bride's eyes, the groom was peeking at one of the bridesmaids. I do audio-visual for social events, a lot of weddings. At one engagement party, my coworker tells the story of the soon-to-be groom trying to carry off his soon-to-be bride, because he's manly and will have his way with her. Anyways, she is screaming at him to put her down, and when he finally complies, she slaps him right across the face and yells, "I'm not done dancing!" When I was 17, I was a bridesmaid in my 19-year-old cousin's shotgun wedding. After the ceremony, we got into the limo to go to the reception. She turns to me and says, "God, I wish I was single." The groom didn't look at the bride once. Sister's wedding. Husband ends speech saying, "Thanks for settling for me." 18 months later, agreed to divorce. 4 people made speeches. The bride joked about the first time she dated the groom when she was 16 and he was 26. The groom was wasted and spoke about how each of the previous times they broke up didn't count and that they would do it right this time. The maid of honor talked about how even when they were broken up they still got along, and the best man made crappy jokes. Groom's brother didn't attend because he too had banged the bride before. The groom invited his female friend. She was in the early stages of pregnancy. Towards the end of the night, the bride asked aforementioned friend who the father was. The friend cheerfully said the groom's name. The bride got blackout drunk and asked me to kill her husband. He was busy fighting one of his groomsmen in the other room. They divorced 2 years later. The day of her wedding, I asked my sister-in-law if she was enjoying her day, and all she said was, "It's a freaking nightmare. This is the worst day of my life." Dude said the wrong name at the altar. When I read this one, I went, uh-oh. I was reunited with the family member just before her wedding. We went out drinking, and she proudly pointed out a guy at the bar that she'd just gone on a trip with and had a week-long prenup rail romp. She seemed to think I'd think that was naughty and funny. I just felt bad for her future husband, but figured it was just a bad choice. The day of the wedding, I went to see her in the bridal suite. She had the guy there with him. She screwed him the night before the wedding. They lasted a few years, but it was a miserable few. My cousin married a nice, respectable girl from Connecticut, but he is a not-so-nice, not-so-respectable Massachusetts stereotype from Norfolk County. Cuz got drunk with his band of Mickeys and Sullys the night before, and when I saw him for pictures that morning, he was sucking on a pint of Skull vodka before throwing it in the corner of the church and calling his friend a slur. He had the same grin on his face for every picture. I pumped some coffee into him. We thought we had it under control, but during the ceremony, he flipped off the guest twice. His brother also taped "Help Me" on the bottom of his shoes for when they took the mass. The bride's father was furious. But then came the reception. My mom didn't want to go. I wish we hadn't. Cuz continued sucking down booze, as did his pals. The bride, God save her, wanted to go ahead with the first dance, Stand By Me. Cuz didn't put down his drink, was grabbing her butt during the dance, and finally spilled it all down her dress. She slapped him, he pushed her. Father of the groom charges the dance floor. The bench is clear. My brother and I ask Mom if she wants us to get involved. She grabs her purse and says, "Let's leave." As his buddies were holding Cuz back, she walked over, slapped him, and said, "Thank God your grandmother died, you disgraceful little Mick." Mama is a very quiet woman. We grabbed Mama and hightailed it out. 2 cops passed us on the way in. They began the annulment 1 week later. I haven't talked to him since, although he emailed me asking if he could borrow $5,000. He lives in a camper from what I hear. Friend got married. On his honeymoon, his wife went to the spa. He stayed in the room to chill. Housekeeping came, young cute girl. Friend paid her for head. Told me about all proud. Didn't last a year. Toward the end of the reception, the bride suggested to the groom he run home and change into street clothes so they could clean the venue and get the deposit returned. Groom got back and bride had opened all the gift envelopes and paid back relatives with the cash they contained. Source: the groom was me. I was in charge of choosing a male strip club for the bachelorette party. I went to check a place out. Bumped into the groom in the audience. We've got a timeline for this one. A bunch of my family members are betting on how long one of my cousin's marriage would last. It's definitely going to end in divorce, but we just don't know when. Here's all the crap that happened. Pre-wedding, the couple can't even agree on invitation card designs, so they decided each would have their own. Some people received 2 invitations. Wedding. They're both from different races, and the groom's family insisted on having a wedding ceremony from their culture too. The bride refused the part where she has to kneel before her husband and wash his feet clean. The groom's family insisted, and she was stuck doing it. The bride got tired with all the photo taking and refused to pose for any more photographs, even though she hadn't taken photos with the groom's extended family. Meanwhile, she had already taken photos with her entire family, extended family, and parents' friends. The groom's cousin told the bride she walked in elegantly and she spent hours crying and refusing to come out for the wedding dinner. Half the groom's family boycotted the wedding over the bride's race and religion. Post-wedding, the bride insisted they should fly first class for their honeymoon. The groom insisted it's a waste of money, even though they had both come from money. The bride flew first class, the groom stuck to economy. Wedding was going okay until the bride and groom got hammered, groom's baby mama ex showed up, and the bride proceeded to lock herself in a room crying and continuing to drink by herself. It was a crap show to say the least. OP says, "How long do you wait to leave in a scenario like that?" I wasn't there, but my neighbor is a wedding DJ. Apparently a couple of weeks ago, she was at a wedding where the bride did her first dance with her ex, who for some reason was invited, because he was a better dancer than her new husband, and she didn't want to get, in her words, shown up. My cousin got his casual hookup pregnant, and somehow they came to the conclusion that they needed to get married. Instead of going and getting quietly married, they decided they needed a gigantic, expensive wedding. Like 5-course meal, 300 plus guests, 12 bridesmaids kind of wedding. Obviously, something like this takes a while to plan, and as a result, she was about 7 months pregnant. Now, nothing wrong with going down the aisle while expecting, but she chose this corseted dress that was cinched so tight it nearly flattened her bump out. As someone who has been pregnant, I can't imagine how uncomfortable that must have been. The fact that they had only known each other 8 months and she was 7 months pregnant was like the elephant in the room the entire wedding. She refused to acknowledge the fact that she was pregnant. She had been out of college for 10 plus years and invited all her sorority sisters. They got up and all sang this weird sorority song together. Very odd for an over 30 woman. I'm probably not explaining it very well, but it was like she was trying to act like she was much younger. They were married about 4 years, way longer than anyone thought it would last. Married less than a year, and a mutual friend my wife and I had got married. During the ceremony, my wife is crying and I asked her why, expecting a response of happy for him or something, and she said, "I always thought I will be the one to marry him." She ended up cheating on me with him and we went our separate ways. They only got married because they screwed unprotected on their first date and conceived a child. Fast forward a few months, the bride objects to going to the groom's friend for flowers for the wedding because she has a religious objection to the gay lifestyle, in quotes. Turns out she's also incredibly racist. The groom is not homophobic or racist at all and was appalled to find out that his new wife wouldn't approve of most of his friends. The baby hasn't even been born yet and the divorce is pending. The groom saying the bride looked really chubby in her wedding dress. The groom making fun of the deaf grandmother. The groom existing. Not all of it was at the wedding, but on our way to our honeymoon, we were on a flight with this couple sitting behind us. She boarded the plane with a giant carry-on and a garment bag with a dress in it. Once they found their seats, she shoved her bags at him to put away, and then went to use the lavatory for about 15 minutes. She was really nasty towards him the whole time. Fast forward into running into them at the resort. She was super stuck up and a jerk to every female and all the staff. She didn't seem to have a problem grinding on 4 or 5 different guys during one of the dance night themed events while her husband drank alone at the bar. Finally, the day of their wedding came, and my husband ran into the groom sitting alone outside of the cafe with a drink in his hand. He sat down to chat with him, and the guy explained that he was freaking out because they had no friends or family at the wedding, because literally no one that knew him liked her or approved of the wedding, and that he wasn't even sure what he was doing there. My husband tells him he's sure it's cold feet, and to just have a drink to calm his nerves. The groom replies that it's his 5th drink. It's like 11 a.m. already. We had an oceanfront villa and they got married right outside of our back door. He looked like he was going to bolt for sure. I guess that was her plan the whole time, trap him on a remote island. Her vows. They were friends of mine who dated for nearly 2 years before their wedding. He loved her more than she loved him, obvious to all our friends, and we suspected she begrudgingly said yes to his proposal. He said his vows first and went on and on about loving her for the rest of his life. During hers, she started with 438 days. That's how long I've loved you. It seemed sweet until she ended her vows with, and I promise to love you for at least 438 more. Most thought nothing of it, and some friends called me a jerk for saying it was a subconscious sign that she wasn't in it for the long haul. She left him exactly that amount of days after the wedding with the note that said, I kept my vow to love you for 438 days more, but I can't for a single day more. Called it. At the wedding, bride-to-be turns up 30 minutes late, arrives inconsolably sobbing, helped down the aisle. Ceremony weird and filled with cries from the bride. Afterwards, spoke to the bride's father and asked how things were. His response, well, that was like getting a cat in a paper bag. Divorced 3 months later. Backstory, the groom, whom we knew, was from a wealthy family. Bride's family saw money and persuaded their darling daughter to marry the guy. She realized the mistake. She ended up with nothing. His family had money, but the groom was young and had nothing. Screwed up people out here, folks. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, linked at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot, linked in the description too. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.
When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.